Hi, everyone. This is Nick Von Walkerbarth, and you're listening to the VonDubCast. If you want to skip right to the interview, skip to 12 minutes. But before you do, please consider subscribing to the podcast on whatever podcast app you listen on. Please consider going to the YouTube page for the VonDubCast and subscribing there, following the social media pages, and also telling a friend if you like the episode. Thanks. All right, everyone. Episode 50 feels kind of surreal to hit a number like that. When I started, like you guys have probably heard me talk about on this podcast before, I always knew this was something I was going to stick with, and just the level of enjoyment I get out of it. I knew I was going to be taking it to this level where I was going to hit 50 episodes, and I'm going to hit 100, I'm going to hit 200, and I feel quite confident in that. But still, to see it come to fruition and to see where I am, it's quite a moment for myself. I'm both extremely proud and also at the same time, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this podcast and about how far I've taken it. And I think this is something that if people have listened to a lot of episodes, they might not be too surprised at, because I am very hard on myself, and I feel like I have a lot of confidence in where I can take this podcast and what I think I can make this podcast into. So I hold a lot of pressure on myself to hit a very high mark, and sometimes the episodes don't hit where I want them to. Sometimes I'm just not on my game, and I don't bring everything to an interview. Sometimes, I never want to blame it on the guest, but sometimes it's just not a good connection. And a big realization I never really put as much stock into it as I think I probably should have is the in-person versus the out-of-person episodes. Seeing that, so it's kind of odd. I'm so proud of what I've done. I'm so proud of some of the episodes that we've produced, and I'm so happy with the direction things are going. But then also very frustrated with the progress, and I want to be further, and I want to be further along. And I know that comparison is the enemy of happiness, and you just got to concentrate on your own work and keep doing it and trust the process. But it's tough at times. And I feel like just being open with you guys about that is important, because I think if you don't, it just turns into another social media. It's just Instagram. It's just putting the highlights up here of, oh, this is always great. This is always dandy. No, there's some downtimes to this too. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and a lot of heart and soul that goes into it. And to maybe see it, the process be slower and not be gaining traction as fast as you want. It is frustrating, but at the same time, I'm so confident in. And I have an episode like this one today with T, where I feel like this is conversation that is on par with, maybe not some of the high watermarks of some of my heroes, but I would say this type of conversation is in my own head, and maybe this is me tuning my own horn a bit, but a conversation like this is important and can hang with the bigger guys in the podcast space. And I'm so happy about that. And I when I started, I didn't know if it would take me 3 years or 4 years before I could have a conversation like I did with T that I'd be this proud of. But I'm so happy that it's happening already 50 episodes in. I think it was happening even earlier than that, but I think I maybe I see that there's some really great episodes that people would be receptive to hearing. Not receptive, just I think they would get something out of these conversations, and the fact that it's still not being heard by very many people, if I'm honest with you guys, and that's part of the process. I knew that was going to become it. It is frustrating, and I think there's some really big things on the horizon. I think you guys would have just seen on Instagram, I just got my first clip up, which I think is a very important part for a podcast of this length, to have clips so people can get a little bit of a taste without having to invest 3 hours into a podcast. So I'm really excited about that. Now that I have somebody that can actually make these clips for me, it doubles down on the importance of finding these clips. Anybody that's listening, I'm really looking for help with people that, as they're listening to the episodes, just if they hear a moment that really speaks to them, of just marking that timestamp and sending it over to me, that helps more than you guys could know. It's one of those things that it's a small act that can go a really long way. So if people can help me out with that, and sharing this podcast. I mean, I kind of want to say, I give those little timestamps at the start, so if somebody wants to skip this part, they can. So I feel a little bit more able to be vulnerable with the real ride or dies that listen to this part too, and listen to me ramble to myself for 10 minutes before the podcast. This is my time. I don't like asking for help. I don't like, that is so against everything I stand for whatever reason. I don't know with how I was raised or whatever. I don't like to ask for help, but maybe this episode, if you're one of those people that's listening to this part, if you could, if this episode does speak to you, don't do it beforehand. But, if this episode is as good of a conversation as I think it is, if you see that too, if you could share this episode, and maybe, say a little bit of why you like this podcast, that goes a really long way. I know I say if you want to share any of them, you can, right? And I usually kind of leave that up to people if they want to or not. But this one is kind of one where I feel like it's a turning point. Obviously it's special. It's episode 50. That was a point where, I was thinking, first 50 episodes, I won't even do sponsorship. But at this point with, the place that the podcast is going, I haven't done it as of yet. And it's just because, when I bring on sponsorship, I want it to be very useful for people, and I want it to be a certain level. And I just don't see it being there yet. Not in terms of the content. I feel so proud of the episodes we put out in the actual interviews and the content itself, but maybe some of the professionalism and some of the just listenership. I just want it to be a little bit bigger when I want to do things at the right steps. I don't want to jump the shark. I don't want to start too early. I don't want to start concentrating on things that very clearly I think there'll be a sign when it's time to do some of those types of moves, right? And maybe that'll just be somebody connecting with me and saying, "Hey, I want to do this. I see what you're doing there, and I want to help." Maybe that'll be a certain getting a certain guest on or getting a certain bit of grip to it. But I know it'll show itself when it wants to and when it's the right time. I definitely believe in that. But until then, I'm just gonna keep trying to have more episodes like this one. Preferably in person when I can. That was so much fun to be able to give T a big hug when he first walked in, and that conversation, like I had said, this conversation started way before the camera started rolling or the audio started recording. We were chatting. That's why you'll hear it kind of jumps right into it. We're already talking when this episode starts, and I kind of intro who T is and how I got to know him. Maybe 30-40 minutes into the episode because we were already talking, and then the Zoom dies midway through. We keep talking through that. You'll just clip it up. We might at a future point be able to salvage the audio from it off maybe a camera or something. It might happen at a later date. But for now, we just kind of, you'll hear us start talking about Apple Watches just on a whim at some point during the interview. And that is kind of where the Zoom recorder died. We just threw new batteries in it. We might have missed a couple of minutes of our conversation. It was actually really good conversation when it does come out, I think. But I think that was just shows the strength of what this episode was and what this conversation was that even though we lost a really strong piece of what we're talking about, the whole episode is strong, and the conversation we're having is so meaningful to me, and I feel like such important stuff that I wanted to talk about, that it didn't even matter that we lost a big chunk of it, or a little chunk of it, I shouldn't say it's big. And then also you'll notice at one point, my boy Brennan, he didn't get much sleep the night before. He started to have a little nappy poo. So if you see me kind of giggling, even though we're talking about some big subjects, you'll see that's the reason why. And maybe it's hard to pick up on the audio, but you'll pick it up. And then he went to go for a walk, just wake up a little bit. And he ended up getting locked out of the room. I assumed he had a key. I saw him standing there. I thought he was just being a goofball. But so we lost Brendan for the last little bit of this podcast. That's why it goes a little bit extra long on there. But we had a really fun time in there. We do talk about some tougher conversations, Black Lives Matter, racism, class, class differences, these types of things, education, all these kind of things, right? Some of them are hot button topics. We try to, like I say every week, we're trying to just find solutions. We're not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I think there's some times where maybe I definitely step away from maybe what would the word be? The status quo with maybe where you need to be in some of these subjects to not get ridiculed. I kind of stepped out of that and maybe showed my own mindset around some of these things. And I think sometimes that can get you in trouble. But if I misspoke at any point, or if T did, just try and remember we're just trying to do our best to bring light to some of these conversations that we think are important. It may not be in the, cookie cutter way that you're supposed to talk about these things. And I think that is what's really preventing progress and moving forward. Is I think you have to have conversations like these where you push the edge cases and try and find better ways forward. And that's what I'm going to keep trying to do every week with this podcast, is kind of have these types of conversations. It's very scary for me to do because you see the consequences every day on social media of what can happen to people. But I feel like that shouldn't be quieting people down. It should be, showing the importance of these types of conversations. So just remember that. But like we say, we always want to change our opinion. If you see that we're wrong somewhere and you think you can, add something to the conversation, come on the podcast. Let's talk about some of these things. I'm excited for the first time that somebody hears an episode, wants to show it maybe a different perspective on one or two of these topics, and then bring up, see wherever the conversation goes on their own. But to come on, this is what it is. I've yet to say no to anybody coming on this podcast. If you want to come, if you like the conversations we're having here and you want to come on, let her buck. This is tons of fun. And I think, anybody would have a good time on this podcast, regardless of what you got to talk about, especially if you hear a topic that clearly you can tell that I'm excited about and you want to have a chat about it. Let's do that. But it doesn't matter what kind of conversations that happen. The conversation goes wherever it goes, and it's just a fun time to do it. So yeah, I know this is a long episode, and I maybe planned to have a little bit of shorter of an intro, but I think I wanted to get some of my feelings out on episode 50 of where I'm at and what I'm seeing and maybe what's on the horizon, because I really am excited for where this podcast is going to be in the future. As you can hear, maybe a little bit impatient on when and where I'm going to get there, but it's all happening in due time, and I'm able to, keep pulling myself up and not get too bogged down on some of those little things that can, eat away at you. So I'm doing good. I hope you guys are doing good. Hopefully some of these restrictions get a little bit lifted here and we can have a little bit of fun, maybe get, some fires in the backyards going and that side of stuff. Still safe, but still getting that human connection, because I'm definitely missing it. I cannot wait to see some people, and man, do I ever miss dancing. I don't know. Everyone I talk to, I just miss going to a bar. When I think of this, I think of the Funky Buddha on White Avenue and just letting her buck with some, drunken dance moves. That's all I want to do right now. So I don't know if anybody feels that, but that's where I'm at in this whole thing. So hopefully you guys are doing good too. And I'll see you on the outro and some really special episodes coming up in the future. All right. See you guys. Okay. Well, I mean, we can just keep chatting.
I just want to go back to those 2 points that we were talking about. So you were talking about how people like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk have all this wealth, and they're actually using it to better the bubble around them, right? I think because there's examples like that, it makes it harder to trust people when they say, "Oh, if I don't do this, shareholders are going to kick me out." That's just indicative, and that leads to the second point, where it's just indicative that it's not just that one person has bad bones in his body or is just looking out for himself or themselves. It's an entire generation of people who have become stakeholders and business owners and have benefited off of this culture of capitalism, that they only think about themselves.
Right.
Like, that's the big takeaway here. And it's infuriating because people like us are donating part of our wealth, when we are living paycheck to paycheck, but we still have a little bit of humanity left, where we see someone suffering and we're like, heck, I got to help this person. There's nothing differentiating us except for pure dumb luck. Yeah. Like, I could have been born into a poverty-ridden family, and I could have been on the streets. I could have had generations of, trauma that Indigenous people have faced. I could have, and just as easily, I could have been born the son of, Elon Musk and had that name. For
exactly.
A little bit of comedy, but like, that's the difference. It's like you have no control over what your starting circumstances are in life. And yes, you can put a lot of hard work and a lot of ethics and a lot of, energy into making yourself something that you were not born into. Yeah. But the overwhelming amount of data and evidence suggests that how far you make it in life has more to do with where you start from, as opposed to how much hard work and effort you put in. Right. Like, that's just bar none. Those are the numbers. I find that the reason a lot of people don't believe that is because the stories that they see and the stories that make you feel good are the stories of people who are rags to riches, who are born in poverty, and through their skill or hard work or effort make it into, multi-million-dollar capital owners, I guess you could call them. But for every one person that does that, there are hundreds and thousands of people that don't. Right. And that's not a discredit to their effort or hard work or ingenuity or skill or whatever. Right. Right. They are exhibiting all of those same things. So there's actual data that's been conducted by research institutes all over the world, and it's just not just North America. This is all over. By research institutes, by universities, by governments, by data banks that show overwhelmingly like that it has more to do with where you come from and what your starting circumstances are, as opposed to, you know, how much effort and hard work you put in.
Right. I want to push back. I agree with that, but I want to push back on it just a little bit, because I think another factor to that, just to maybe add to that same point, I think, yes, that has more of a factor to do with it, but I think what is actually capping where you can go with it is the narratives around you, right? You already mentioned it kind of in passing with what you're talking about, is the stories, right? Do you have examples of people that are in the same situation that you, that have got out, right? I feel like there's so much, human ingenuity is such a powerful thing, right? Like, people can do amazing things even if they come from not a lot. And I think if there's stories to show you that, and you can believe that you can do it, you can break out of those things. But I think for so many people, there's just no stories for them. There's nobody beside them that, you know, from their neighborhood that have made it out and have shown a path forward. And I think that's the same thing with the Joe Rogans and the Elon Musk. I think, like you said, that shows now they've shown a new path. I think when we talk about the Jeff Bezos of the world, you know, it's easy to call them evil. And I see that. And always words are just, you're trying to convey intent, and it's, you know, the best word you can find, maybe not the right one. But the way I look at it is, I think it was capitalism itself. And I don't want this to sound like an anti-capitalism ad. I'm really not. I'm actually, you know, for people that know me quite well, you'd be surprised for that coming out of my mouth. But I feel like there's certain areas that it's failed. And I feel like it was a beautiful experiment and it's got this far. And we're so worried about going back to first principles and things that have worked to change them at all that we think, oh, we can't, to tarnish, to say that there's bad parts of capitalism is to say that the whole thing is bad. And right. And you can just get painted with the communism brush pretty much. So it's a natural next instinct. But to me, I think that is just the natural representation of where you take it, right? Businesses have been growing and growing, and that power, right? Like we talked earlier, it's not about money necessarily. It's all about power and politics, right? And I feel like that is, money is the money is the currency that plays. That sounds funny. Money is currency, but you know what I mean? That's just the pawns that they move around to play that game of power, right? And I feel like that's what capitalism is. To win that game, you have to follow those rules. And that was what was set out, right? So everybody, you know, you look at 30 years ago where Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all these rich people around the world were, you know, in 1990, let's say. The pathway forward, what they had seen at that point was, this is this capitalism game. This is how you win. You get to a certain point where you're beholden to your employees, right? And then you get to a certain point where you're now beholden to your shareholders. And there's at every point in this game, there's an excuse. Right. So at any point when T comes up to you and says, hey, you have, you know, all this wealth, you have $1 trillion, you could do 0.1% of your wealth and do all this, you know, do this amazing stuff for the world. But to them, they say, but I have my shareholders, right? I'm attributable to them. I'm accountable to them. If I don't do everything in my power to grow this business for my shareholders, they'll boot me out. I won't be here. Right. And that's that defense that everybody from, you know, the 1800s on has had that excuse built into this game, right? And I feel like that's what is changing, is Elon Musk and the Joe Rogans of the world are showing, no, there's other ways to play this, right? You don't have to be so myopic on this one pathway forward to success, if that's what they want to call it, right? And I feel like that is what is hopeful to me, to see that there is pathways forward. I think there's so much of humans, we just get down these paths into these ruts, right? And we see it as one way to go, right? I think I've used this example lots, but the NHL, you see how NHL players act in the media, right? There's one way, the Gretzky way, you know, very glad, get pucks deep, you know, everyone works together. We'll, you know, another 20 minutes, we got this. That was every interview ever, right? Because that was the pathway forward. And if you wanted to have success, that's what you did. Then Spit and Chicklets comes along and they show what can happen to a Kevin Hayes, who was star power wise, relatively unknown before that, but he shows his personality, shows a different way. And now you see these young kids come up, the Kirby Docs of the world, and they're just showing personality out the ass, and people are loving it. And they're reaching these heights that were never attainable to people. Like usually you would have to be in the league 8 years and your skills would have to show for themselves to gain that kind of stardom, right? And now we're seeing new paths forward, and now you're seeing these NHL players. That Gretzky pathway is still there, but now they've shown another one. And I just love that about people that are trailblazers, that build another path to show others that, hey, there's ways to do this, right? It's not impossible. And I love that, right? When you talk about these people that are starting a lot further back than others, I think one of the best things we can do is to show pathways forward, to build pathways forward, to find ways that we can bring them, right? Because I think it's a noble goal to try and make everyone start from the same point. But I feel like it's such an impossible goal. Not impossible. It's such a hard goal that there's other goals like trying to put less effort into making sure everyone's starting from the same place and more effort into making sure no matter where you start, there's pathways to where you want to go.
And so that's a really good point.
Right.
And that's my biggest concern or biggest issue with people who hoard wealth is that you went back to, you talked about how the billionaires and trillionaires of the world, their main objective is to grow the company more and more and more and more. And their primary, aspect of their role is to bring more money in. Where is that money going? When you have enough money to, this is the fundamental problem that I have with capitalism and just people who hoard wealth, is that when you have enough money for yourself and for your family and for your kids and your kids' kids to live a life 100 times over, what is the incentive to keep making more money? Where is that money going? It's not dissimilar. It's not dissimilar to the ancient Egyptians, where they would get buried with their wealth because they thought that it was getting taken to the afterlife, and it's not. It's just material. It stays here, and you would only further your legacy by using some of that money that is not going to be used for anything else ever, right? Ever.
Right.
By using that money to donate to, as an example, there was a Run with the Winners Club in Cleveland, in Ohio, that for every kilometer that you ran during not Black History Month, but in March after the
Black Lives Matter
protests were happening, they were donating money to legal institutions that were fighting cases on behalf of people that were wronged.
Right.
People that were prosecuted as a result of them participating in Black Lives Matter rallies. Something as small as that can change an individual's life. Right. People like us, normal people, are donating to that. People are running in support of it. People are posting on social media. People are getting other people to donate. And you have, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying Jeff Bezos is evil. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the tendencies that Jeff Bezos and other contemporaries exhibit tend to have evil connotations or tendencies, right? I'm not saying that they're bad people.
Right.
There's memes of him with the Dr. Octopus arms, and people like to make fun of it. It's like, oh man, this is, he's an evil genius or whatever. I'm not saying that he's a bad person. I'm saying that it's so easy for him to be a good person that it's infuriating when he's not.
Exactly. And I agree with that. And something you said, once you get this amount of wealth where you could, live a life 100 times over in your kids and your kids' kids, right? And it's hard for us sitting in this room that have never understood money for anything but money to understand what it is on that. Because I think we already mentioned before we started rolling, we were talking about money being just a proxy for power, right? That it's a game they're playing. It's I want to win, right? The difference between $100 billion and $200 billion effectively in how you live your life is very negligible, right? We understand that. We can see that. But it's a game they're playing, right? And it's that capitalism game of I need to win, I need to show. It's that constant growth model that stops it. And what that does is the only way for wealth to exist is for poverty to exist. And what you're arguing for is to try and bring that into balance. And I agree with you. And I think that is. But I think when their only goal is to win, and that proxy for what winning is, I think that's what needs to change, is what we call winning. Because the only thing we've called winning for the past 200 years because of that capitalism game is wealth accumulation, right? Now, there's no other social capital or societal capital to all these benefits that should be, right? It's just like economics. There's unseen externalities in the system that, because it's brought us so much, it's brought us the internet, it's brought us, cars, capitalism has made the world an amazing place that we're so scared to call out those little pieces that need to adjust. The game needs to be twisted, right? As soon as there's a power game enters the system, now those externalities exist. Same place we kind of brought it up is the law system, right? There's a power game with prosecutors to win, right? And then you listen to a podcast like that Joe Rogan one where we had the Innocence Project on, and they talk about all these people that are just being, denied DNA evidence that would exonerate them because there's behind the scenes politics going on because they don't want to affect their record, right? And that's the kind of thing. It's the same thing with politics. It's the same thing with high level corporations. There's a power game going on. And as soon as there is, now you're not doing what's best. You're just trying to win.
Well, it's I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I think that just leads us to the most basic of human flaws is that as together as we are on this world, we're all really selfish.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're looking out for number one.
Mm-hmm.
And so all that stuff about the political records, about wanting to win, that's all self-serving.
Yeah.
It does nothing to further, what we should be aiming for in this world, from my standpoint anyway. Like you said, the game is, these people have played this game very well over the last 50, 60, 100 years.
Right.
Where their game is to gain wealth and through wealth gain power and influence. Mm-hmm. But why is that? Why do you want that? Because the vast majority of the people just want a peaceful earth.
Yeah. They want to be loved.
And be loved and have someone and thrive on community and walk down the street and say hi to your neighbor and like buy bread from someone that is going towards their daughter's college education, like stuff like that, that's what most people want.
Right.
And so I think, and it's already started, where generationally you need to change the expectations for the generation that's coming after you.
Right.
All you can do, all normal people can do, because we don't have the wealth and the power to actually effect material change in an instant.
Yeah.
Right? All we can do is educate people who are coming after us, or educate our peers as to what is actually important.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that you have $1 billion when you can walk outside and see people freezing to death.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter when you have $1 billion when you walk outside and you see city employees ripping off benches from transit stops because people are fighting inside it to see who gets to stay warm for the night.
Yeah.
Like that, the fact that kind of split exists is, can I swear on this podcast?
Of course.
It's
fucking
fucked.
rights you can.
It's fucked.
Yeah.
That is fucked.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It's depressing. It's sad. It's demoralizing.
It is, yeah.
And so I think that you can change is slow. It always has been. It always will be. That's the cliche. And yes, but that's only true because the people who have the actual means to change the world refuse to do it. They say things like, I'm beholden to my stakeholders, or I'm paying the salaries of all these people who are coming to work and contributing to the system. That's to me, I'm not asking for a handout or anything like that, but it's infuriating when you are doing everything in your power to try and change things through education, through donating whatever you can, through showing up to protests that matter, to voicing your opinions, to showing your personality. And that's causing, nothing to happen, nothing tangible to happen. And then you see someone who has an insane amount of wealth and with like a flick of the wrist, they don't even have to think about it. They don't even have to.
They would never have to think about it again after that moment. They would go on living their life and nothing would change.
Exactly. Yeah. They actively don't even have to spend the time to make that change. They have legions of people that can do that stuff for them. All they have to do is talk to their PR team and tell them, hey, donate, $1 million to whatever charity is you think would be best. And that will make a tangible change in a lot of people's lives.
Right.
And the fact that that's not happening on a constant enough basis is what's infuriating.
For sure. And I agree with all that. And I find that quite demoralizing as well, right? That fact that we've gone so long and this issue has been so on the forefront and so visible to people that are willing to think about it and have that compassion to think about it for so long that it's not changing. But to me, it's again about changing, like you said, you have to change people's idea of what winning is, what it looks like. It's not just wealth accumulation. And I think until probably 5 years ago, the best example of that was Bill Gates, right? Of what he did with his wealth and how he tried to change the world, which we could probably sit here and both argue either side if we wanted to of the pros and cons of his way of going about it. But that was the gold standard. That was what everybody saw. And I think he does a lot of good things, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is a show more than an actual thing, where when you look at Bill Gates and you look at Elon Musk of who's really wants to change the world, to me, it seems a lot more genuine coming from Elon Musk. And that's a different thing. But we only had the Joe Rogans and Elon Musk the last 5-6 years where they've had the influence in the social capital, right? For a long time, Elon Musk was kind of, I think probably the last 2 years he's actually solidified. For a long time, everyone just kind of laughed him off as, he's about to tumble, he's about to fall. Yeah. And he keeps, surprising everyone and pulling it out. And because he is a genuine genius and a genuine good person at heart. And then you have the Joe Rogans who he just was always, he's been the same person for 20 years. He just has grown bigger and got more reach with it, right? So now he's gotten onto the stage. What I'm excited for is now with a new gold standard of what it can be and all the inspiration that's coming out of Elon Musk and Joe Rogan. And then from that, all the offshoots of these people like the Weinstein brothers and Sam Harris and all these intellectuals that are showing a different way. They're showing that money isn't the thing and it doesn't bring happiness, and they're teaching all these lessons. What is the next 5 years going to look like? What are the entrepreneurs that are 18 right now that are coming up and are going to build the next level? The Lex Friedmans of the world who is about to start a startup. He doesn't know what it's in, but it's going to change the world. I know that for a fact because you can see he has it in him, right? Exactly what we're talking about in abstract terms of trying to, you know, make all these arguments to support one idea of what it should be, of a better way, right? It's hard to put to words. We talk about them on this podcast all the time, how words are a poor proxy for intent and ideas you're trying to confer. And you usually try and, you know, use all these metaphors for it. But you can see it when you listen to Lex on his podcast. He has it in him, that compassion, that good-heartedness that wants what's best for society and is going to help the most people. And that is what excites me, right? If you focus on what has been happening for so long, it's easy to get discouraged by that. But I think there is so much out in the world that is positive and is showing a new way. And I'm so excited to see where that goes that I'm just, you know, like, I never want to hit fast forward because I love life and I just like, I love everything. But I'm also so excited to see what 5 years from now, and even selfishly, not even for what they're going to create, but to me, what I think about a lot is I got to watch Joe Rogan grow the last 5 years. And what he was in 2016 when I started listening to him, and then going back in his catalog back to 2009, you could see the growth of what he was and his ideas and who he is as a person and his compassion grow and his love for humanity grow. And now he's, say, 50 years old, right? And I've seen that same process with Lex Friedman, who's probably my other biggest hero, right? And watching him. And he's 30, I'm just guessing, 34 maybe. Imagine what he's going to be, the ideas and the inspiration, the things that are going to be coming out of him at 45, right? Like, just that thought to me is so inspirational. Like, the things that they have given me just personally in my own life of just inspiration and to battle back that, because I've definitely, you know, fallen into those days where I'm depressed about this, that the world and all those things you kind of started by bringing up, that has got me down. But these are the things that have lifted me back up and given me the inspiration for it. And I just see the rapid pace that they're growing at. I feel like everyone thinks that podcasting is, you know, the biggest thing right now. I think it's just the tiniest thing because it's had such a huge rate of increase, but I still think it's very much on the small side of it. I don't think we ain't seen nothing yet, you know, to put it colloquially. I think we're going to be seeing so much coming out and so many more people like myself that feel all those things and feel that frustration and just let it eat at me. And I became extremely depressed, right? Like the decision to start this podcast came from probably the most depressed time I've ever been in my life and I was very scared because I'd never felt that feeling. And, you know, the things I enjoy and like watching my favorite YouTuber, like a video, I'd be so pumped and just feel nothing. And it terrified me because I was letting all those things eat at me. Right. And for the longest time, what had stopped me from getting to that point after graduation was the Joe Rogans of the world and all that light that they were bringing into my world. But at a certain point, it wasn't enough and it wasn't tipping the balance because I felt like I wasn't doing anything for it. I was listening to all these things. I was gaining all this knowledge about what needed to be done and the change that we need to see in the world. But what was I doing about it? I was still, you know, going to work every day, you know, some might argue causing some of the harm, right? Like with what I do, that is something I'd be lying to you if I didn't have, you know, my own mental qualms and about what I do and the industry that I'm in, right? And I still believe in it and I believe we do it amazingly and I have a lot of faith in it as well. But it took that point to stand up and say, why am I not making a change? Why am I not trying to bring this out? Like I like to fancy myself a somewhat intelligent person. Like maybe I can make a difference, right? And from the moment I made that change and started to try, I felt so much better, right? Just being able to have a conversation like this and feel like, oh, somebody else sees this too. Somebody else sees the unjustness of a Jeff Bezos going the moves, you know. And I feel like we're picking on Jeff a little bit here, but you could put any of the politicians in there just from the time of March when COVID. Rewind it back to February when, if you're on Twitter, if anybody's on Twitter, you could see China spraying like mass disinfectants all over and you saw this was coming. And from that point on till now, if we just take their track record of these people in these huge positions of power and what they did with them versus public good versus personal gain, they are so weighted. You'd have to search far and wide to find anybody that tried to do for the public and not just, you know.
Well, that's my point.
Exactly.
That's
and
what I'm saying.
I agree with you, right? And like I see that too. I think I also see a strong counterbalance, right? It's almost, I mean, I've been watching so much Star Wars lately that I feel like I'm in a mindset of that.
I just watched all 9 episodes. I just sat down.
Oh, yeah?
It's like sidebar. My sister gave me her Disney Plus login.
Yeah, same. Like, Chase just gave me his Disney Plus login.
Watch this all. And I'm watching it on my like laptop, on my tablet, like while I'm cooking and stuff.
Have you seen The Mandalorian?
Oh, yeah. I love it. It's fantastic.
I just watched it like a week ago. And the only reason I hadn't watched it is because I didn't have Disney Plus and I was just lazy and busy in the podcast and stuff. And I got it. Yeah. I watched it and I was like, I'm so mad at myself for not watching this. It's so perfect. It's the old school. It's the original trilogy, like cinematography wise.
Yeah.
Like the cuts and the scenes and the feel, like they brought it back.
I think, so this is a sidebar conversation, but I was listening to something that, you know who Freddie Prinze Jr. is? See, he's an actor. Yeah. He played like I've
seen him on some podcasts.
He's played a bunch of iconic like teen roles.
Yeah, but
he was also Fred in the live action Scooby Doo.
Yeah,
and he voices one of the characters in Star Wars Rebels, like the cartoon.
Yeah,
his name is Kanan, and he was on this podcast, and this clip just randomly came on my feed on my social media feed, and he's talking about how he's mad at people who get mad at Star Wars. He's like, okay, so all the generation that grew up watching, you know, episodes 4, 5, 6, or episodes 1, 2, 3, or episodes 7, 8, 9. They're the same characters. It's an archetype type show or movie. You know, it's all based on Greek mythology. Like these are George Lucas's words. He's created these characters in this world. Sure. There is no evolution of these characters.
It's the same stories.
Kind of characters. Yeah. And it's the same story. And it's the reason for that is Star Wars is for kids.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not saying that you and I can't enjoy Star Wars, but it's primarily for kids. It brings out the kid in me. Like you sitting there and talking about how you felt all those things, the old cinematography, the nostalgia, you find that uplifting or nice or makes you feel good because what was the first time you watched Star Wars? When you were probably, 10 to 15, 15 to 18, something like that?
Probably right? 5 or 6 with my dad and watching on TV, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
The
so
originals.
It is for kids. And so I get really mad at people like, and Freddie was getting really mad at people who complain about, they're pandering to kids and they're pandering to the old ways and stuff like that. Like this is what this franchise is. And it's great. It's watch it for the action, watch it for the nostalgia. It's fantastic. It's really well done. The Mandalorian is phenomenal. I think the pure fact that you see Pedro Pascal's face like 3 times in the whole show and he puts on such a fucking great performance. Like my partner came out of the bath when I was watching the final episode of The Mandalorian and she came out right as he takes his helmet off and is looking at Grogu. Spoiler. And I'm just bawling at this point.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just crying, like straight ugly crying. And she comes in, she's like, "Are you crying?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like, is it that good? I'm like,
yeah. Well, if it makes you feel better, I cried this morning on the treadmill watching Clone Wars just because of the beauty of this one episode. So feel free. I'm a crier. I cry all the time.
I think I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried. And that's another thing that we can delve into.
Oh, for sure.
People,
I'm sure we
people
will.
Who, it's becoming decreasingly so, but people who talk about, men shouldn't show their emotions or men crying is a form of weakness. And that's, it's becoming less and less tolerant, that point of view in our society, which is good, I think. But to those people, like, I watched something, it made me feel something, and I expressed it in the safety of my own home. It didn't hurt anyone. Like, why should that make me feel like less of a human being?
Right. And really, it shouldn't. The only thing that makes you feel less is the narratives around it. Again, just it's always the narratives around it. People are going to think. People are so selfish, they don't think about you anyway. Even if they were watching, they're more concerned about themselves. Like they're thinking, oh, he's crying, should I be crying? Right? Like probably what's going through their head is less judgment of you and them judging themselves in the surrounding. Everyone's so self-indulgent that 9% of the time people don't care what's going on with you, right? Which is a huge lesson to learn. It's a huge burden off your shoulders because I think everybody walks through the world because of just what consciousness is, right? You are this animated being where how you see the entire universe is through your own head. So being selfish is part of the gig. That's part of human,
the experience. Yeah.
So you see everything that way. So you automatically assume you walk in a room and you trip. Everyone's looking at you. All eyes are on you. They're laughing at you. You stumble a word. But everybody in that room is in that same thing. They're in their own head, right? And that understanding is such a weight off your shoulders from all that pressure we put on that we need to be perfect. And just before we leave it, I want to go back to that because I think that's such a good point. For the longest time, I was, when the episode 1, 2, and 3 came out of Star Wars, I loved them, but narratives around me was those are bad. So I the prequels suck and all that. And I was that guy. I've come a long way and have checked myself and have realized how stupid these stories are. So I'm fine talking about it. But at the time, I was that committed. But I loved it. I loved the saber battles. Dude, episode 3. It was awesome. So and I realized the reason why I loved them so much and why other people wasn't because I got to be a kid when I experienced them.
Exactly.
And that's what it was. So then when I went and saw episode or
7, 8, 9.
So I'll take you through. I saw 7. I loved it. I was just it was so much like I went and saw it like 3 times in theaters. Probably shed a tear. I don't remember, but if I had to guess, I probably did. Just getting back to Star Wars. So the next movie, I was still riding high. I loved the movie as a whole. There was a couple of scenes in it that kind of threw it for me, and I was like, oh man, I didn't. I went into the third one. I was furious. I hated it. And I know, and it's funny to say it because I know that it's because it's just not. What made me mad was I felt like it devalued some of the work that was done. There's certain stories, especially going back and listening or watching the Clone Wars TV show and all. Because I think you're so right. These stories are archetypes, right? These stories have been around forever. I had 2 of my favorite authors, the Coen brothers, on a couple months back, which was probably the high point of this podcast so far because I figured that would be 3 or 4 years ago where I get a guest like that where it's so meaningful to me. And I got to talk to them. And at one point we were talking about the Aragon books. And he said, and one of the brothers said, I think I could ruin that for you. And I said, like, oh, take your try, right? I've read the whole series like 10 times. Like, probably not. I love it a lot. Like, you're probably not going to ruin it. He said, it's just Star Wars. And he kind of went through all and I was like, oh yeah, good point. But in my head, everything's Star Wars. Everything, and if we're taking that another step, Star Wars is the Bible, right? The Bible is the Gilgamesh text or whatever. These are the same stories. And if you listen to Sam Harris, he figures these are the stories that as we developed voices and became able to talk, we told stories about humans, right? We were just talking like the archetypes of God and all these things. And Christianity is the only religion where God is this one archetype on this side. Most religions, their gods have a little bit of good and bad in them. They're more dualistic. They're more like humans, right? Christianity was the first one that took it all the way to the one point and made, no, our guy is everything good and there's no bad in him, and there's another guy that stands for that. They made it polarized, kind of like we see in the world today, right? Like a very much that same lens, but that wasn't always how it used to be. Trying to wrap this right back to Star Wars, but so that didn't really hurt. It didn't hurt me, right? I still love Aragon. I still love Star Wars. I love all these because to me, a good story is going to follow that format because they know what it is. It's about the world you create around it. Aragon creates an amazing world around to tell that story. Star Wars arguably created the best world around it, right?
It's a pretty cool universe.
It's an amazing universe, right? And I feel like that's what they did. And that was my argument where I think the originals, set the tone. I feel like the prequels still had that world. And I feel like the first movie, and then I felt like 8 and 9 lost a piece of what that world was. I feel like they started to take it out of the world and it wasn't as grounded in what the world stood for. And going back, that was what was so refreshing about seeing The Mandalorian. I can't even find words to put to it what it is. But as soon as Mandalorian started, and it might just be the cinematography, right? They might have just kicked it old school and more practical effects. That might have been the only thing playing the track. But it just felt like, oh, this is that universe, right? I know what story I'm in for. I know it's going to be the same arc, and that's fine. That's what I'm here for. I paid my ticket of admission, but I want it to be good old fashioned Star Wars and to be brought back into that with these, and then to see character like, have you ever seen Clone Wars TV show?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, as soon as you're done whatever you're watching now.
It's next on the list.
It is. It's amazing because the development you get out of Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan, R2-D2. If you've watched Mandalorian, Ahsoka Tano makes a reference. Did you know who that was? Was that impactful?
I know. I played all the Clone Wars games.
Okay, right. So
I knew all these characters.
So for me to see her come in the Mandalorian, because unfortunately, the last episode, we'll try not to spoil it any more than we already have. But the big spoiler in the last episode got spoiled to me because the actor on the night of release tweeted or put on Instagram like something about, hey, this is why we try so hard. Moments like this is why we try so hard not to have spoilers. And I was like, oh, well, great. Now it's spoiled for me, right? But where was I going with that? But something for me, seeing Ahsoka Tano there was so impactful for me because I got to see her whole backstory through the Clone Wars TV show, right? And the way George Lucas builds characters and some of the story arcs they go on to. Now, after watching that TV show, then going back to watch the movies, is such a different experience because you know so much more about this and so much more depth to all these characters. And it just, to me, that proves the world, right? I think sometimes people rely on story and that archetype, and that's all they have. They don't really have much story to it, right? So in a 2-hour movie, you can kind of get by because you don't have to dig too deep, right? But if you made it a three-story arc, maybe that's pushing the boundaries of this world we've created and it starts to fall apart and the sequels aren't very good. You see that all the time. Matrix, perfect example, right? But what you see with Star Wars, it's such, and I think same with Aragon and some of these other places, if you can create a world that is so rich that it doesn't matter if it's the same story over and over again, if it's still going to hook you in and you want to experience more of this world and find out more and dive into these characters more, that is the sign of a true great, right?
Well, and not to cut you off, but I think that's what's fantastic about The Mandalorian is, and what Disney Plus is doing now with like the expanded Star Wars universe, multiverse, whatever you want to call it, is that you have like the Skywalker saga, you have, it's almost like a linear timeline where the story of Anakin and Luke and Obi-Wan and all these things. The Mandalorian is really the first one outside of the TV shows like the Clone Wars and Rebels and stuff, is really the first offshoot of that, which still has, nostalgic ties to the original timeline. Right. The fact that it's just like, when I was watching Star Wars for the first time, one of the questions that I had in my mind was like, what is that person's life like on a regular basis? What is their story arc? What are they doing? What are all of these people that, the Jedis are killing or the Sith are killing? What were their lives leading up to this point? That's what I'm interested in.
Which is the Clone Wars. You're going to love it so much.
And that's why I'm really excited about it. Because like I know them because I know the Clone Wars because like when I played the games, they kind of follow along with the
same arc.
Right? So, but that's why I really like The Mandalorian, because it's like, it's an offshoot of that world, which is just as captivating. And now the next one that's coming out is the story of Boba Fett, which I'm beyond psyched for, because
and you'll be even more psyched after you watch Clone Wars, because the amount of it shows kid Boba Fett pretty much after seeing Django. Again, spoil it, but
I mean,
movies are at this
you
point.
Don't know Django got beheaded.
Come on. So right, and that was Mace Windu that took him out, right? And you get to see him on his path to revenge, right? To get back at him, and that character development now to go back. And I feel like when I got to see Boba arrive in, again, spoiler, Mandalorian. I mean, we kind of already spoiled that, but it was so much more special to me because now I had that whole other thing, because I was talking to, my sister and her fiance about like, oh, how did you, because they watched The Mandalorian before me, right? And they were telling me, you've got to watch it. And I was asking them, then once I had it, I said, okay, how was it when Ahsoka Tano showed up? Was that kind of whatever, right? And how about this Boba Fett? Oh yeah, that was cool. And I was like, was it though? Because like, I feel like if you would have watched this, you would have been like blown away, because just to see that character return and see all these, and once you watch the Clone Wars, there'll be a couple other characters that
I'm excited.
That you see that come back, and
I'm excited to fully like delve into it. It's intimidating because it's like 7 seasons,
right? But they're 20-minute episodes, right? And like
I say it's intimidating, but I'm gonna breeze through.
Yeah, exactly. I've been watching them on double speed, so it's 10-minute episodes. I watched 6 episodes on the treadmill this morning. Like Jesus. I crushed through it, right? So, but I've already seen it once, so I've already seen it at that. And also, the only reason I don't usually watch TV shows or movies at a faster speed. It's usually like educational content or anything I really can get away with. But sometimes it takes away from real engaging stories. Yeah. But because 2 reasons: 1, I've seen it before, I can cruise through it, and then 2, it's also a kid show. Yeah. So like really, you're more along for the storyline and the plots and the character development and all that. Like it's not.
You don't need to, you don't need to pay attention to every single thing. That's
exactly, and
it
doesn't like this. The cinematic moments and stuff, like they still hold their weight at double speed. I find it. Maybe that's just because I've seen it a second time, but I could talk Star Wars fucking all damn day. I've been waiting to talk some Star Wars with some people if I'm honest. But I think since we kind of started jumping in, maybe I should introduce you an hour in. Fair enough. For everyone listening, T, you were the first person I met in Lister. I moved in early. My sister was helping me move in, and you hopped on the elevator, and you knew Courtney, and you just said, "Oh, this is your little brother," and you were one of the first people I met. And then just happenstance would happen. Our floors got paired for dodgeball that year. You were our, dodgeball god. You were the guy that showed us the ropes of it, and then the next year. You were an executive with the LHSA, and I was a dodgeball executive, and then the next year you were the president, and I was an executive. So we had this journey throughout Lister that kind of followed each other throughout, and we became quite close. You're one of my best friends, right? I love your mind. I love how you think about this. You're quite an intelligent person. I always enjoy talking to you, but I feel like I missed so much of who you were before. So I maybe just doing some rewind before you got to Lister, before I met you, who was T? Like growing up, I feel like I missed that because I feel like I didn't even know you weren't Canadian until like 6 months into knowing you. You speak so well, right? No accent pretty much at all. Like, and you've told me you went to an Americanized school, right?
So it's that's common. You weren't like one of the the only one.
I thought you were from Calgary for the first 6 months.
Hey man, I'll tell you one moment before in my first year, January after the Christmas break, people came back to the floor, and Scotty was on my floor, and Jail was on my floor, and they knew that I was from back home, and they knew that I didn't go back home. Obviously, you can't fly home for 2 weeks,
right?
But the vast majority of the people on my own floor were like, "Oh, how was Christmas?" And I was like, I mean, I was here by myself, so not, I was just lonely, but whatever. They're like, "What do you mean you were here?" Well, I can't really fly. I can't really fly halfway across the world for a 2-week vacation. They're like, "Aren't you from Calgary?" People on my own floor who I've been living with for 4 months at this point, like spending every night with them in the lounge, kitchen. These people become your family. They didn't even know that I was from Pakistan, and it's crazy because I didn't feel like I was misrepresenting myself or saying that I'm from Calgary. It was just, it just never was a question, I guess, that was asked.
And usually there's certain things culturally that will tip you off. And for me, that was what was so surprising, to not have any of those little cultural tip-offs. And to me, I'm very curious to ask you, how is the culture shock in coming over here? Because it didn't seem from the outside. I mean, obviously from the outside, you can't see anything, but I'm curious what the internal state was, because from the external state, it seemed like there was no culture. It seemed like you'd been in Canada forever, right?
So yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it has to do with my upbringing. Part of it has to do with just the general state of media in both countries. So it's really interesting because Western media is very present all across the world.
Right.
And when I say Western media, I'm talking about North American as well as European media. So, movies, TV shows, music, there's a big three.
Yeah.
The big media stuff is sports. They're prevalent all over the world. And so in a country like Pakistan, where I grew up watching Western TV shows and
Star Wars
and 90210 and Beverly Hills Cop and all these classics. I felt like watching those shows about people in like regular lives gave me an understanding of what regular life was here. And so that made it easier to adjust once I came here. The biggest thing that took adjustment to was the weather, hands down.
Oh, for sure.
There was no culture shock with the food. There was no culture shock with anything else. It was just the weather. Because when I came to Canada, I had seen snow, obviously. But I had never experienced living in a place continuously where temperatures are below freezing. Yeah. Like that was a new experience for me. And I thought it was, minus 10, minus 15, whatever. I never did the research into looking at what the averages were like for Edmonton.
That's hilarious.
So, I remember, I think the cold streak that year happened this is 2011. It happened in like December, first couple of weeks of December. And it was minus 47 or minus 52. And I just remember like thinking to myself, like, what the actual
what am I doing with my life now?
What possessed people to build a city?
Yeah.
What? Like, it blew my mind that it was minus 50 and people were still expected to like just go on with their regular lives. Yeah. There's no snow days.
Shit don't stop. Yeah.
Shit don't stop. Like, how is everything not breaking and falling apart here? Like, it's amazing. Yeah. But growing up, I don't know, I was a fairly typical middle-class Pakistani kid. Like, my dad was in the military. My dad was in the Navy. He was an engineer in the Navy for 25, 30 years. My mom was is an English teacher. So that definitely influenced.
Yeah, that helps a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I learned English the same time that I learned Urdu, which is my native tongue. Right. And it's because most of the education in Pakistan is in English. Wow. If you go to a public school, or a government-funded school. So it's different. Most schools in Pakistan it's almost like a 50-50 split. If you live in a modern city or in an urban area, let me put it that way, it's majority of schools are private and the minority schools are government schools.
Mm-hmm.
But when I say private schools, I don't mean private schools like you see private schools here.
Right.
Private schools in Pakistan are similar to public schools here.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind. We have you have to wear a uniform, and there's an assembly in the morning and those kinds of rituals. But that kind of stems down from the colonial rule of those areas for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that stems down into our practices. So I went to, through my formative years, so like grade 5 onwards, I went to a school that was run by the Navy. We lived in a gated community, and the school provided subsidized rates to wards of naval officers. Mm-hmm. And so I went to that school, but it was also open for people who were not, associated with the Navy in any way. Right. It was an institute.
Yeah.
And so growing up in that time frame was really interesting because it was a public institution, but run by the Navy. So it was kind of run not from an educator point of view. It was run more like a cadet college or like a military barracks, or like we're grooming these people to be right. They got to be professional. They got to stand up tall. And
which is so important, right? Like what we talked earlier, I can't remember if we recorded or not, about those little pieces of adversity that, allow you to grow, and how, the universities and the workplace sometimes becomes just, babysitting, and it's not actually education at that point. I feel like even you said the university, it ends up becoming high school, right? It's a continuation of high school. And I feel like the only reason we can even use that as a framework is because of our understanding of what high school is, right? But I feel like something like that, where you make high school a little less hand-holding, a little bit more, you have some responsibilities, a little bit more of that cadet side. I feel like that would be so important. Do you feel like you were ahead of others that maybe went to more traditional schools, like the school I went to, where they pretty much hold your hand through? Or?
So if I'm being very honest, I fucking hated it at the time.
Oh, yeah. I bet you did, yeah.
I felt like my freedoms were being infringed on. We were being told to act and dress in a certain way. And if there was no room for individuality in that structure, right? Which is something that I still kind of disagree with. Mm-hmm. And it was very like reined in under the veil of decorum, and like you have to be presentable and you have to do this and that and yada yada. This is the way that you have to follow. Yeah. And so from that standpoint, I didn't like it at all. But I think what it did give me subconsciously, and I didn't find this out until like years into my university.
Always happens.
Yeah, exactly. Was that it taught me how to take that structure and actually apply it to my personal life. And whether or not that was the intent of it, I don't know. I haven't talked to any of the educators from back home since I graduated about whether that was what they were trying to achieve with the structure. But what it did cause me to do was like be able to compartmentalize things, be able to process things properly, be able to, look at something from both sides, and then make the best decision, to be calm under pressure, to be composed. It subconsciously taught me those things. And I didn't know that I had those things in me until I was put in a situation where I had to exhibit those things. Yeah. And not to say that I did that without fail, but I think that's definitely a reason I was able to be, I was able to accomplish some of the things that I did while I was in university. Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm appreciative of the experience, but I would have appreciated a little bit more individuality, a little bit more freedom to do things that you wanted to do, because I made it out in a certain way. There's other people's whose spirits got crushed, and then they, took that route, and then were like, well, I guess I'm just going into the military now. Yeah. And that's just my thing. And they used it not because they wanted to do that, but just because it was an option that was available. And they were just kind of, I'm just settling for this. Whereas with me, I was always like, I want to go out of, the realm of Pakistan, if I can afford it, obviously, and live by myself, survive by myself, really get to know who I am as a person, and see if I can actually hack it, by myself. I think that's scary, and I think that's what made me do it. And so when I first came to university, actually in my first year, I was very I was more a product of my conservative-ish upbringing than of who I wanted to be more liberally.
Mm-hmm.
And as in my first year of university, I realized that my thoughts are my own and what I do with my life is my own choice.
Mm-hmm.
I became a lot more honed in on what I had been feeling the entire time. So more left, more liberal, more social, more outspoken,
mm-hmm.
more, realizing that there was no rein on me other than the rein I put on myself.
Yes.
Right. And that was really that my first year in university was really that.
Mm-hmm. And then I got to meet you in your second year when you already kind of found yourself and you were very unique and were maybe still probably figuring those things out. But when I first heard you mention that you didn't like it and it was the lack of freedom, that struck me because I think that is the rebellion against that is a very important piece, right? Mm-hmm. I think that is something you need to be a successful. Not something you need, but I think it is one of those things that can drive you to very high places, that pushing back against freedom. I feel like that is something that I feel a lot. And I feel like that's something maybe that drew us together was that we have lots of values. We have lots of things we stand for, but it's not anything anybody told us. It's things that we feel ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we try to live our lives following our own moral compass of what things seem true to us, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's almost it's such an important thing to try and build that pushback against freedom, but to balance it without, like you said, crushing spirits, right? And I feel like for the 1900s to maybe 1970, 80, mm-hmm. it was kind of, let's make this as strict as possible, let's push on people. Some people are going to break, but we're going to get the best sort of people. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we had that realization, hey, maybe this isn't the best way, guys, right? But then we went too far to the other side where school became like what I went through, where mm-hmm. it's not going to be very hard on anyone. We're going to hold your hand, right? And now you don't have that other part, right? And I butted up against my own freedom because I felt, and this is probably going to sound awful, but I felt like I was, in grade 4, I was butting up against, they were capping with everybody else. And I feel like I could do more and I wanted to have more conversations and it was shut down, right? Mm-hmm. And there were certain teachers that recognized it and were awesome, right? And a lot of times it'd be, the gym teachers and the other teachers, but the core teachers that were just trying to, and not to their fault, it's because they have 30 kids and they can't take the time to be special for you, which I realize now, but at the time it was, I know this, like I handed in my work in 5 minutes to you and mm-hmm. now you're getting mad at me, obviously because I was disrupting the class all the time. Like I realize this now, mm-hmm. but that constant feeling like I needed to fight against that authority. And I was always, that one man on the right. And I felt like I was that renegade. I was that Jedi in class where mm-hmm. I was always listening and somebody would get in trouble for something that they didn't deserve. And I was that idiot. I didn't know this person. They weren't even that close of a friend, but I started getting in a pissing match with the teacher because I know that's not right. Yeah. And my parents taught me this from always, because one of my best friends, Drew Discover, I don't know if he's listening to this podcast, but he was a little bit of a hellion growing up. And I mean, I didn't help it at all, but so much times he would get in shit. And if we deserved it, I'd be quiet. But I used to get in so much trouble because there'd be times where he didn't deserve it. And I would go nuclear in defense of my friend because I'm loyal to a fault, right? And my parents would always say, hey, like, cut it out. You're getting in trouble. But to me, it was like, no, I'm doing what's right. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was so formative to me. And I'm guessing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I imagine that feeling of wanting that freedom. And I would imagine if you really sat with that thought, you would see it in a lot of areas in your life, probably coming to Canada, mm-hmm. The university experience of what I saw of you and you becoming your own person and finding your own values, right? I feel like that is so important. But to me, what goes back to that is how do we maybe write that balance? Where's the middle ground there, right? Clearly what we were doing, your experience of what you went through was too far to one side, right? Where you're seeing people get crushed. We don't want that, right? But there was some good that came out of it. What I went through was too easy. Now you see the prospects, you see the younger generations of what they're coming out of at that. And there's some sparks in it, but there's a lot of people that are just coming through very much that didn't get tested much. They had their hand held and they get it in the real world and they scramble. I don't know if you've had the experience. I'm sure Brendan has of hiring, a couple 18, 19-year-olds lately and what you get out of them. It's a different thing, right? Like it's not, it's not what it used to be. We're not getting these cream of the crop people that are ready for the real world straight out of high school anymore. And I'm wondering what we could add in to maybe find a middle ground there.
Well, so it's a good question. And I'm not the authority on it, obviously.
None of us are.
But I think we should be paying teachers a lot more.
Fucking right. But I feel like, I agree with that, T, and I always hear that, but I feel like I don't hear coupled with that, which I think is huge for it. And I think if we just start paying them more, the problem will get worse. What I think couples is, and I think this with all these things, I think this is with police, I think this is with teachers, I think this is with so many things where, yes, they obviously need to be paid more, but we also need to up their accountability, right? That the schooling needs to get harder. Well, I got to sit with Tyler Lobb and go over his curriculum for one of his ed semesters, and he was doing finger painting and stuff. Like, it was the most, and I'm not trying to defy the profession in that, but I think it needs to take a couple pages out of the engineering book, and it needs to be a little bit harder. And I feel like this is going to sound awful, but I know probably 30 people that tried a degree, engineering, all this stuff, and then it didn't work out and they went into ed. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to change that. I don't think it should be a fallback degree. I think we need to make it have a certain amount of prestige. And I think definitely getting paid more comes with that. I think it needs to be a little bit more accountability. And then the people will rise to that. Once it's if teaching was what it should be and it was thought of what it should be, maybe people like me and you, I would love to. I love teaching. Teaching is amazing. I would love to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. I was never going to teaching because you don't get paid fuck all. Fuck that. And you don't. There's no prestige with it. There's none of that.
So sorry to interrupt, but that's the problem. Is that you've reduced
your pool of applicants.
You've reduced your role of educating the future generation into they only work 10 months a year.
100%.
They don't fucking do anything. Oh, let's not pay them.
Exactly.
Their base wages aren't going to rise with the cost of inflation that's risen over the last 10 years. It's stuff like that. And also the most harmful thing that people say about teachers is that, they're not in it for the money, they're in it for the kids. Fuck that. It's a profession.
Yeah.
It's a profession.
Yeah.
You are working and you are spending your personal time. You are spending your energy, your resources, and you deserve to be paid for it.
Yeah.
And when you are doing something as important as educating people, educating the next generation, who, in my opinion, is, going back to the whole capitalist conversation, the cure to fighting people who don't feel this moral urge to spend their money into helping others is through education, right? Is educating the next generation as to what actually is important and what you should be striving for in life. And like it or not, whether you as a parent would agree with this or not, your kid is spending 8 hours a day with another individual. Why not give them the tools and the money and the training necessary and let them influence that kid? Because they're going to influence that kid one way or another. They're spending 8 hours a day with them, right?
Right.
So I say this from a point of view of, like, my partner and my mother are both teachers.
Yeah, my mom's a teacher as well.
They're educators.
I know tons of
and the shit that they go through on a daily basis, like, you could not pay me enough money to do that.
100%.
Right?
I quite agree.
And then finding out how much they get paid is infuriating. And so it's a good point where a lot of people view ed as a fallback degree, and that's not okay.
That's causing harm.
Yeah, it is causing harm because it decertifies the profession. It devalues, it gives us aura of, anyone can be a teacher, and that's what creates shitty teachers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
100%. And also there's so much, because it's not something that you strive for, it's something you fall back to. Now when you get into it, like me and you both have a friend. Yeah. I'm not going to say his name, but that went into it and really doesn't like it because he was trying to do some other stuff. He fell back onto ed and now he's in ed and he fucking hates it. Right. And I'll tell you after who I'm talking about, but you see that, but now, yeah, sure. That sucks for him. And I feel bad for my friend, but my first thought is those poor kids. Cause now you have someone that's there. And he's an awesome dude. And I'm sure, like he'll be one of those teachers where like that I needed, right? And that's the balance too. I think sometimes people get into that, but then those are the special people that can see that one kid like me that needs that little extra freedom or just somebody to say like, you're not crazy. Yes, you're a little advanced, but you'll figure it out, right? It'll all balance out in the wash. And that's what you need just to feel that, because I feel like that was what I felt so much is like, am I crazy or is this shit all a joke? And like, this is easy and I'm bored and like I need some more.
Well, I think it's a great point. And while you may feel that way, not a lot of people, like maybe the vast majority of kids in your grade didn't feel that way. But I think there's an opportunity there where where the system needs enough resources that they can identify people who need more challenges and then put them in more challenging streams.
Yeah.
You know, like don't just put people into buckets, actually identify, spend the time learning what each kid, what makes them tick, what makes them work, and then put them on the best path of success. Ideally speaking, that would happen with every single kid. But the
financially,
fact of the matter is there's not enough resources associated with the education system.
Unless Jeff Bezos kicks in with 3% or something. Right?
There you go. It's like
I know.
Exactly.
It's frustrating.
This is what's the frustrating part is that it's you and I can sit here and see paths forward.
Right.
All we need is the capital.
And to me, I go through the same thing, and I feel like to me, it's just it's not Jeff Bezos. I see it as a big conglomerate, and I feel like I maybe discredit myself by the way I say it. I always say they're all the same thing, and I don't mean that in this big conspiracy sense. I just mean they're so interweaved. You know, a politician and you know the executives at Facebook and all this stuff. Like they think about all these as separate things. It's so integrated, and people have worked in all these places. It's all the same thing, and they're all in it for the same goal as Jeff Bezos: to collect the wealth and suck it out of the people. Right?
They all profit off of the problems in the world. If wars weren't profitable, weapons manufacturers would not exist, right? The NRA would not exist. War profiteering is very real.
I think the NRA would still exist if war wasn't profitable, just for a different reason. And I feel like that is so much. I think growing up in a rural community and knowing what a connection to guns are, and knowing the other side of it, which I totally get people's argument. I feel like that's the other side of it is when pro-gun people hear that, it's the same thing. Just like somebody that doesn't have a strong attachment and culture to guns wouldn't understand somebody that is against guns. It's the same way. I feel like I have a foot in both camps and I understand both sides. And I feel like it would still exist just because there is something more to it. It's hard to see. It's really hard to see a weapon of harm. There's nothing else a gun can do other than harm. I guess to hunt and feed your families, right? And that's their argument. But for somebody that doesn't even see hunting even as something that we need to be doing, right? It's hard for them to understand that there's any use for that and any cultural significance. And they say, oh, if you find guns culturally significant, you are a bad person, right?
Well, no, so I'm not saying that.
I know you're not.
I'm saying when I said the NRA.
Because we were, motivating each other to stay at it and stuff. And like he was saying, like, oh, you're running that much? Like, let's see. But I just couldn't get it to connect. But I definitely would love to do that. That's definitely a big feature of these Apple Watches is that the connect with your friends aspect.
It's so funny, especially in this world where like, in like society now where even with all the technology that can connect us, we feel so disconnected because of things that are going on. Something as silly as just sharing data with your friends and seeing what they're up to on a daily basis it just makes me feel connected. And I don't use it as you can use it as I'm motivating someone to go for a run or they're motivating me or it's a competition. And to the people that
works
use it for that, power to you. That's awesome. But I think the real beauty in having this kind of feature is because it's not only applicable to those people. When I'm having just a lazy day and I look over at my watch and I see Semple hasn't moved, or sorry, I shouldn't say name. My friend also has not moved all day. I'm like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, that's good shit, hey?
Like I feel better. I feel, I feel connected to him even though I haven't talked to him all day.
And it's nice to see that too, because then you can use that feature for however it fits with you. Like me, competition guy. Yeah. I love that competition. A couple years ago, I found Orange Theory Fitness. I don't know if you ever looked at them. So it's like you go into a room and there's treadmills, rowers, and like weights and bands and all this stuff, and you do like cycles. But there's everyone around you, and you're competing with them. You're not competing with them. You're doing your own thing. But if you're in this head, if somebody gets on these treadmills and is running hard, not a chance am I getting beat by anyone. I never got beat once in that room, except by the guy who owns the gym there. The guys I can't, don't want to say his name on here, but that really helped me along my journey, right? Like having that competition, because that dialed in with what I needed. I would go in there and bust ass harder than I wanted, even on a day that I wasn't. If, like there'd be days where you get two, old grannies beside you and, now you're just competing with yourself. But there'd be days when, a new guy shows up and he goes on the treadmill beside you and he's, cranking it. Never once am I ever going to let you put that treadmill faster than me at any point. That's just not happening, right? Yeah. I will kill myself on this treadmill before I let that happen.
Right.
And that really helped me. But that's not everybody, right? But it's about finding what that motivation is for you. Like for me, competition is a big piece of it, right? And it's finding healthy ways to do that, not because there was never any, it was just for me.
You're not putting anyone else down.
Exactly. Right? I just, to anybody else in that room, they didn't know I was competing, right? Like maybe at certain times if, there'd be every once in a while it would happen where, they'd hit, up one and I'd up one and they'd up. There was times where you could tell it was a competition, but for 99% of the time, they don't know what's going on. They just think you're trying to get a really good run in. But in my own head, oh, you guys are all out to get, like, this is a competition, right? And that just falling into that was something, and I haven't gone a long time, and that kind of felt, I just didn't work with my schedule of having to be there at a certain time, and that just couldn't really fit it in. But to stumble upon those things and to always be on the lookout, because until I started Orange Theory, I didn't realize that about myself, of how much I probably should have, because like always growing up, school was, gym class, you're competing, right? It was always athletics were always the competition aspect of it. And then it really ramped up in high school, because in Slave Lake, we had this program, it was called Sports Performance. Two amazing teachers, two of my favorite teachers to this day, put this program together where at the start of they had to find a way to make it somewhat academic. So at the start of the year, you have to do two things on the academic side. You have to learn all the bones and muscles in your grade 10, 11, 12. And grade 10, it's kind of the basic bones and muscles. 11 is kind of, in grade 12, it's pretty intensive. You have to know them, and you get a sheet and you have to name it all. And you have to get, 90% on that before you're allowed on the ice, right? And you do that. And then the other thing you have to do is build a weight plan, right? So you have to show your knowledge of what groups you want to do, what your plan is. So then Tuesdays and Thursdays, you'd go to the gym and you'd do workouts. And then Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, you'd go and skate and play hockey, right? Monday and Wednesday would be drills and skills. And then Friday, you'd play a scrimmage with all your friends from high school. And it was fun because it was people even outside of your hockey group, because of the different age brackets you get to play with. And also another thing that was fun was, it was school, so it was male, female, right? We were playing with everybody, and everyone kind of got to play it. It was a really cool experience. But then what that did as well is, now that was always offered first semester. So then everybody that wanted to take gym class as well, because we also had regular gym, would be in second semester. So that all those hockey kids would all be in that second semester gym class. So now every sport turns into that. So that competition we had with the hockey, we're playing soccer, it's to the death soccer. You're playing, baseball, it's to the death baseball with all these people in your community. So I always had that. Didn't realize that, like going to university and just trying to work out on my own and really struggling with it and not realizing that. And I've kind of figured out how to do that on my own. I'm really good at working out on my own now, but at that time I had to build that skill. I didn't have that skill. I had never worked at it. But what I found when I tapped in is, I have a different skill. It's to out-compete, right? And I didn't realize that until I got into that room. It's so funny how, right? And Orange Theory, I'm sure, is such a different thing to so many different people. And it's about just creating something that is a good program that other people can layer on their own framework to, of how they're going to use it, right? That is what makes things successful. And I see that a lot in podcasts, right? It's not about successful podcasts anyways. I think there's a lot of podcasts that just try and find an audience, a niche that they know that can just pump them their, what they want to hear, right? And those usually are capped. But then you see somebody like Joe Rogan that just sat down with his buddy smoking weed and just trying to have fun for a long time and just let it grow organically and brought it to that point. Now that allows people to just put their overlay of what they're in it for, right? If you just watch Joe Rogan when the comedians come on because you just want to laugh and you just want to break from the world, that's awesome. If you're not really into comedy, but you just like the science, and when he has the real hardcore scientists on, you watch, it allows for this, right? And all he's doing is just chasing his passions and chasing his interests, right? Which is a huge lesson for me. All I'm going to have on is people that interest me, right? Like, it's going to be all over the map. It's going to be sports. It's going to be authors. It's going to be intellectuals. It's going to be scientists. It's going to be my friends, right? And that's interests me. And I hope, and I feel that eventually that will ring true to other people, and they'll find the episodes and the things, the framework that this works for them, and the things that they enjoy out of it, right? And I feel like that is a good lesson for anything that wants to be successful with it, is just not to try and create some specific thing for somebody. Create something good and allow them to find what they get out of it.
Well, I think there's two things. One, you want to create something that you're proud of, obviously, because that's
for sure.
But with anything, with working out or with creating a product or with creating a podcast or anything really, I think the most important thing is just being aware of, or the first thing to start is just being aware of what you want to get out of it. Because you're doing this at some level, you're doing it for everyone else, or if it's being marketed to a bigger audience. but at some level, you're doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
Right? You're the one who's putting the energy and time and resources into this, whether it be working out, studying, blah, blah, blah. Realizing why you're doing it, and then looking inward to see what skills and what techniques and what drive you have that you can harness into helping you achieve your goals. So, like you said, Orange Theory, you realizing that you have a competitive drive, and then using that competitive drive to help you achieve your goals, which was to be healthier, work out, get in shape, yada, yada, right? That process is more important. That thought process is more important than the actual results that you might obtain.
100%.
Because you live within that process. And so we all hear this cliche of, people who go to the gym, they're like, oh, just, enjoy the process of lifting. Don't like try to fast forward to the results. And I used to think that it was super cliched, but it's super not. If you don't actually enjoy the process of doing something that you think is going to reach you or help you reach your goals, you're never going to ever even be in distance of reaching those goals. Like if I didn't actually, enjoy the physical aspect of working out, I wouldn't get to, lose 90 pounds, which I did, right? That's just not going to happen. For sure. And I think that leads into a larger conversation about like enjoying that process. People apply it to school, people apply it to jobs, people apply it to all different sorts of things. And I think it's really important because from my vantage point, our goal in life is not to be happy or be successful or chase greatness, right? That's for me personally. My personal goal is to be content with where I am. Yeah. Happiness and sadness are two ends of the spectrum. They're fleeting emotions. Yeah. And while you should do everything that you can in your life to like, feel happier most days than not, you have to realize that sadness is out of your control. It's very important. It brings you back down to earth. You can use it. Being content with where you are, who you are, what you're doing is, in my opinion, is more important than constantly being happy, because that's just, it doesn't work that way.
I agree. And I think something that's very important, actually, I was listening to a podcast on the way up and they talk about it. It was actually in the framework of kind of what I said earlier about how Christianity took God and made it one side of the polarity, which is the first time it happened. Most religions, Shiva, like a creator and a destroyer, right? Like there's usually both sides. It's two sides of the same coin. And they took it and said, no, it's a continuum, and these are two sides of it, right?
An omnipotent God and an evil.
Yeah, and I feel like that switch has happened with everything. We think everything that way, right? Happiness and sadness. We need to always go towards sadness. And now, as soon as you take it from being two sides of the same thing into two separate things that are very far away, now it devalues one and raises one up too high. We're putting too much emphasis on happiness and we're vilifying sadness. Sadness is very important. I feel like the society doesn't know how to grieve. We don't know how to be sad. We don't know how to, there's so much of the emotions on that side of the spectrum that it's not over here and over here. This is the same thing we're talking about here. And we need to give them both the same weight and we need to give the same space to them to enjoy them. And I feel like that's the same thing, right? It's right and left. The values of both. What we need to be successful is to bring them together, right? And to find the best pieces of both. And the only way to have that is conversate. And I feel like there's so many structures and people that benefit on keeping it from this, togetherness to pulling it to these diametrically opposed things. That it's hard to watch because there's a lot of money being made by keeping it opposed and keeping people fighting over it, keeping the right and the left fighting, but without realizing that, hey, why are we fighting each other when there's a bunch of people, Jeff Bezos is making money, there's all these people, that whole upper layer that I said is all the same people, they are all making money off of us and we're just taking it on the chin because we're fighting with each other, right?
You should really, the title of this episode should just be profitability.
Yeah, there you go, right? It all comes back to it at the end of the day.
It's so important.
Spiritual profitability even.
What you need, what we need to be mindful of though is when we talk about emotions, like happiness and sadness and contentment and the plethora of emotions that exist in the middle, is recognized privilege that comes along with it. So you and I don't know about you, myself, I feel like I'm neurotypical. My brain functions in a neurotypical way. It experiences happiness and sadness in, equal kind of quantities. And so I'm able to consciously control doing things that make me happy and not do things that make me sad, right? That's me, that's my brain. but having experienced listening to some people who are not neurotypical explain to you how their brain works is really hard to understand. But once it clicks, it blows your mind, because there are a lot of people in this world who are not neurotypical without realizing that they are not neurotypical. Right. And so and that's where mental health comes into play, because you need to be cognizant of people's mental health and saying things like, oh, I'm going to say what I want to say, and if it offends someone, it offends someone. That to me is on the is pushing the limits of being ignorant, because you are relying on your perception of someone else as also being neurotypical, which is not always the case. It's the same argument that people make with white privilege and recognizing color instead of seeing I don't see color. It's the same argument, is that you need to be mindful as a smart, capable person, for sure, that things that you are saying or things that you are doing are going to have different effects on different people based on where they're coming from. And while you can't satisfy everyone, I feel like you, as a neurotypical person, or as a person with some level of knowledge and experience dealing with people from different backgrounds, can be kinder, for sure, right? And yeah, they're kind of skewed off point, but I think it's really important to point that out.
To keep that in mind, right? And I'm going to have to push back on that a little bit. I feel like you may not like my pushback here, and this might piss some people off, but I feel like in all those areas, I agree with everything you said to a point, but I also see that there's another side of this that doesn't get enough light that needs to balance out that. When we're talking neurotypability, I think that is a huge thing. I think people need to understand that there is the reality of chemical imbalances in the brain, and people do have that, right? And we have to hold compassion for those people. But I think also there's things that can manifest as that aren't that. And I think like there's trauma that can create the same thing as being neuroatypical or non-neurotypical, whatever the opposite of that is. You know what I'm saying? Brain imbalance. There's traumas that can happen. And we talked about earlier, you were saying, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said like, I'm so lucky I wasn't abused and I didn't have this and I didn't have that, right? That is all true. But also there's another point. The worst thing that ever happened to you is still the worst thing that ever happened to you, right? The worst trauma you've ever experienced, to you, that is your worst trauma. And everybody has this, right? And I feel like there's so many traumas that can, the results of it, the feelings, the depression, the mental states, it manifests as an imbalance in the brain, right? And that's how we treat it. And because when we try to say, I feel like there's so much damage that is caused by us thinking we understand the mind and thinking we know we can just use this tool and this. We don't understand SSRIs. We don't know what they do. We think we do, but really we know that this certain thing goes here, something magic happens, and then, we think it uptakes the serotonin uptake, but that is all still a guess. There's so much. And it's not to devalue that is, but you listen to evolutionary biologists like Eric and Heather Weinstein, and they talk about the human body and how amazing it is and how resilient it is. And they say, okay, now, do you believe that there's actually 30% of the population that has brain imbalances? Or do you think there's something maybe closer to, and not even to get crazy, just for number, I'm throwing these numbers out of my ass so everyone's aware. This is not an actual study. I'm just saying, just to try and prove a point. Maybe it's 25% brain imbalance, and maybe some of that 5% is traumas and stuff. Me personally, I would argue it maybe even further. Maybe it's, and again, I'm using poor numbers, I'm just trying to illustrate a point. I think maybe we've so far focused because we found this one treatment method that is effective. So now we're painting everything with that brush. I think we need to be back up a little bit and step into our ignorance of, we don't understand. We think we have understand. We have some tools, but I feel like we're overprescribing. We're going into this. Whereas there's other things like exercise. And I know I've been depressed, and I see how hard it is just to get out of bed. And I understand that way more. I've heard people talk about that. And the thing that really changed even before that was hearing podcasts like Ari Shaffir go on Joe Rogan talk about his suicidal tendency, and when he was very highly depressed, and he's on the other side of it now. But to hear somebody explain it, in that in-depth and to that degree, it helps you feel it, right? Like when you hear people talk about depression and that, it's hard to really understand, especially if you haven't felt it yourself. It's very hard. It's something, it's hard to quantify. It's hard to experientially put yourself in their shoes. But I found like something like a podcast where you have 3 hours to hear this person's story of long and short of how it affected them, and that it really puts you in that, and it gives you a lot of that compassion. And I think we just need to be a little bit more, I do think the initial point you made is that we need to be aware and hold that in our brain that not everybody's neurotypical. I think that is a great point, and I do still agree with that. And I don't think what I'm saying devalues your point. And I think it is something that needs to be said. But I also think that we're on a dangerous path of moving everybody towards SSRIs. And I know so many people that have benefited so greatly for them. And a lot of times that's just that one thing that helps them get out of bed in the morning to be able to put things in place that have now helped them and help them get to the gym and start exercising and start to enjoy the process. And once they get to that point, now they have a different structure that helps them get to where they need to be, and they can back off that. I just think we also, in so much of the time, we're compassionate, we're trying to fix things, and we end up hurting them, right? And I feel like that's the same thing. If you kind of mentioned, like going from not seeing color to really focusing on, I feel like personally, I've seen so many steps backwards in terms of race and people focusing on race and making it
performative.
Definitely performative. I feel like that. I agree. I see what you're saying, but that's all. I'm trying to make a different point. I feel like we were on a very slow but good trajectory, and it was moving too slow in regards to that. If people were getting better in slow, but things move so slow, right? Unfortunately, it moves at the rate of death, right? As the older people fall off and the younger people take their place, but that's not fast enough, right? When there's atrocities happening, we can't wait at that pace. And I understand that, right? And I want to see change and I want to see it speed up, but I feel like in some of the tactics that they've taken to try and move that forward, it's actually hurting the cause, and it's making people think less of these organizations altogether, right? Like I feel like there's so many things that are being put to try and elevate people, and what that is just causing people to look at it as if they're less, as if they're not worth it, as if they can't do it on their own.
So I see where you're getting at.
Yeah,
but I think the thing to note is, how do I put this? So you're talking about change being slow, and we're on a slow good trajectory.
It's not even. It's about what that strategy, what the end goal of it was supposed to be. It was to get to a point where, not in what people say of, I don't see color, right? Because we understand that is, I can fully understand the argument of people saying, hey, that's not a good thing, because if you did see that, you have to understand what they've been through. If you don't see color, you don't understand the other side of the coin of not the things that they benefited of. But I do think that getting to a place where race doesn't matter to people, it goes back to Martin Luther King, right? Like, judge people by the content of their character. And I feel like that was the end goal of what we're too slow. And I fully accept that too slow to get to that point, but that was the path we're on. And now, in order to speed up getting, and I don't think it's not even to speed up getting to that point. It was, we're back here. We were not even looking at the end goal. We're looking at right now. There's atrocities happening. These needs to change, right? And things need to change now. And I 100% agree with that. And I feel like the strategy that they picked to fix those right now, to fix these things and to kill racism right now and anti-racism in this big movement is great. And it is going to have so many benefits right now. But I think long term, what it does is it prevents us from ever getting to that point where race doesn't matter and we just judge people on content, because race every day gets elevated and elevated as this big thing that is at the top of our conversation, and everything. Race comes before everything. Race comes before, and that's not a bad thing, because I think that's the counterbalance of, for a long time, race was nothing and people had no space to even understand, no compassion, no understanding of that whole other side of the world. Like we talked about, people didn't even understand what's going on there. So how can you have compassion? We don't even know what's going on. But now I think we're swinging to the other side where I see things causing harm. And I think that is what worries me. And I know, but the thing that worries me is that it's coming from a good place. They want good things. And that's what I see that. So it's hard to have these conversations where it's like, I want the same thing. I want equality. I want all these things. You know me. You know who I am. You know I'm a good person, right? But it's now, how do I put it to words that I want the same things as you guys? I just think the methods and the strategies you're using right now are, I don't think you see it, but I think it's causing more harm than good. And I don't know how to find the right words. And that's why I'm not happy, but I like coming on here and trying to battle with these things and in a hopefully safe space where, I can make mistakes. And if I say something that's not great, I hope that you'll step in and tell me, right?
That's a good point. So, two things. Ideally, yes, race shouldn't matter. Right. You should be judged on the content of your character as opposed to the color of your skin. Agreed. Second thing, you don't need to know exactly what a person of color has been through. You just need to be aware that their experience
is different from yours.
For
sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
Just having that basic realization will cause you to be more compassionate.
For sure.
Will cause you to question how you're interacting with people of color and people of different races and religions and yada, yada, yada in your life. How you can actively make changes in your own life to better the experience for people who have stuff like that.
For sure.
Gone through stuff like that. On an individual basis, that's all we can do. We can only influence the bubble around us, right?
Yeah.
Like I've been called all sorts of things going through university and living in Canada for the last 10 years. I've been called all sorts of racial slurs, all sorts of, religious slurs from people that I have from strangers,
from friends,
from people who I've had to interact with on a regular basis, and just kind of bury that down because I know if I speak up against this kind of stuff right now, I don't know who my allies are. Am I going to get slammed? Am I never going to be able to succeed in what I want to do?
Right.
That is a fear. And me being a very privileged person of color, having the ability to come to Canada and educate myself here, right? I still go through that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really important to be aware of when you are in a position that doesn't have to go through those things on a daily basis. That's what I've meant by being aware and recognizing your privilege.
For sure.
When it comes to you disagreeing with the methods that things are progressing in, or it's not the way that you would do things. You're entitled to that, right? That's your thought.
Doesn't feel like it.
But no, you are.
Feels like there's no conversation. I feel like there's no space for conversation to be had right now. This is the strategy we're going, and if you don't get fucking on board, you're a racist. You're a Trump supporter. You're all these things.
So no, I disagree with that because that is, it's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's there are extremists on all sides,
right? And
that's a very extreme point of view. What those people fail to realize is that you are coming at it from a point of, I want to help, I want to understand, I want to get on board with what you guys are doing, but here are my thoughts. It's on you as a member of the community that's historically been privileged to present, to search within yourself and find, how can I present the thoughts that I'm having to this group and have it form something constructive, because that's my
which is what I'm trying to do.
Because that is my end goal.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. How can I put aside my ego and my pride and my privilege and help these people achieve what I think that they should be achieving?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you want racial justice, you want racial equality, you want social justice, you want all these things. Right. Your goals are aligned with them. Your means might not be aligned with them, but because it is a thing that is affecting them primarily, you need to be able to, and not, I'm just saying you, I'm just talking about general public. Like totally this includes me as well for issues that I don't know about, right? Or the issues that don't affect me firsthand. You need to be able to frame your thoughts in a way that is only constructive to these people.
Right.
And so it's, and that's a bigger ask than, that I'm framing it.
Right.
It's a huge task, but the only way that people who are not suffering through those things are of value to that movement is if they present their thoughts in a way that is constructive.
Is constructive, right? And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do, right? But it's hard to say I don't agree with the current strategy and make that constructive, right? Like, and what you said was, and I love what you said there. The biggest thing you need to ask of people is just to understand that your experience is different from others, right? I agree with you. I think we kind of blazed back because we had so much to talk about, but I feel like just to take a pit stop there, I agree. Like, I think that is the biggest thing. And to see myself, one of the biggest things during the Black Lives Matter movement, I really tried to find some ways, and I found there's certain things. I started listening to a podcast called Brilliant Idiots with Andrew Schultz and Charlemagne the God. And from that, I started listening to The Breakfast Club. And they kind of introduced me, just like Joe Rogan introduced me to all these other people. They introduced me to this whole other side of the culture. And not to say that I understand it even, 1%, but my understanding of Black culture from before I started listening to after was immense, right? From a podcast, right? Because it was day to day talking about the show, you know, long form, hours and hours every week, you know, they're in your ear. It's like you have a friend. It's, you know, you talk about, it's kind of cliched now, you know, oh, I have a black friend, right? You know, that whole trope. And it kind of comes back to that, but it's more than that, because that is at a certain level. I feel like it became a trope because it was so untrue, and just people using it as a shield when they said something that was offensive, right? That was the shield they threw up. But you do learn a lot, right? Like, I'd never had a Pakistani friend before I met you. I know so much more about Pakistan now, and not even from you, because like we don't talk about Pakistan much, right? We talk about golf and hockey and you know, girls and drinking and, you know, whatever it is on that day, whatever we want to talk about. But because I have that connection to you, and now Pakistan means something to me. Now when I see a movie like The Big Sick, where, you know, they're talking about that and Pakistan comes out. Now, because I have that connection, I listen more and I'm trying to take that in, and I'm learning stuff. And now my knowledge about what Pakistan is grows, right? And now it's going back to that same podcast, Brilliant Idiots, Andrew Schultz's other podcast, Flagrant 2, which I love and talk about all the time on this podcast. Akash Singh is his co-host, and he's from India. And from him, you know, he's kind of the go-to on Indian culture for everything. I didn't realize to what degree India and Pakistan's relationship was, right? And every time that comes up, I listen to it way more, because I have my Indian friend in Akash, right? And again, that's just putting it, but just hours and hours in your ear, and I have an actual friend in you, right? It's about growing growing your compassion circle, right? As soon as you find someone, and I think that's what you said, is just to understand, the first step to growing that is to understand that yours is different than others, right? Because I feel like that's what prevents so many people from having that understanding, is they don't understand that people are different. They think, you know, over in Pakistan, it's the same thing. They're the same people as us, you know, and they're just, or they're so different that they can't understand. It's almost the same thing. It's either they think they're the same, or they think they're so different that they're almost not even, they don't understand that they're humans at the end of the day, and they don't see the connections.
See, the second part to that argument, or to that point, is that it's your responsibility to learn.
Right.
If you want to be helpful, and if you really care about these issues that are plaguing communities like this, it is on you to learn, because the resources exist for you to learn about this kind of stuff. Like you mentioned, you're learning through a podcast. People learn through protests. People learn through, you know, going to speeches and rallies and TED Talks and stuff like that. Yeah. People learn about stuff through education. People learn about stuff through work. It's whatever method you choose to learn about that and become more compassionate is perfectly fine. But it is not the job of people who are literally fighting for their freedoms and fighting against oppression to educate you. Exactly. It is not their responsibility.
Yeah. And I agree with that. A couple little pushbacks. And again, I think we agree on 95% of this. I think we're really concentrated on the 5% where we do disagree, right? Just for people to learn. I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that are really going to learn from this conversation. I think this is an important conversation to have. So, I want to push back just a little bit, because I think what you said is, it doesn't matter what method it is that helps you learn about it. That's where I push back. It's two things. The responsibility piece, I struggle with that, because I agree with you that it is a responsibility, but I hate putting responsibility onto others, because I hate when people do that to me. Going back to that freedom point, anybody says, this is your responsibility, you have to do this, I push back automatically, because I wanted to look up these things and learn these things because I care about it, and I genuinely want to learn, right? But if somebody didn't, I wouldn't want to force that responsibility on them. But that leaves you in a bad place, because now you're inhibiting progress.
But then they wouldn't. But my point is, it would not be their responsibility in that situation, because they don't want to learn about this in the first place.
Okay, that makes more sense.
My point is, if you are willing to put yourself into this situation and add value to the stream, it is on you to educate yourself in the best ways possible to do so.
Right.
That's what I mean by responsibility.
And I think this is where I think we just see it a little bit differently, right? Like, again, I think we agree on 95% of this. I think we're framing it as a different story. And we'll definitely get you some water here after this. I'll try and wrap it up. But what I saw this, and when I saw that video, I was so emotionally connected, right? And I was so desperate for things I wanted to help, right? But there were certain things that came up where, not only did I pick, I started listening to all these podcasts. I was listening to Killer Mike talk. I was watching news. I was listening to these people from these groups, from these Black Lives Matter. I was listening to speeches, and I got to see the areas where I learned, and I found that there's a big difference between getting yelled at and having a conversation. I feel like so much of it is turning into again, it goes back to power. You give people power, right? You give this power. So now there's a power to hold over people. You're not doing enough, and I'm going to yell at you for it, right? And I don't think that helps. And I feel like there's so many places like they did this thing called the Black Intellectual Podcast, where they just had a bunch of people of color that came on of really high level intellectuals in the space, and they had this beautiful conversation. It's on YouTube if you want to look at it. If you look up Black Intellectual Roundtable, you'll find it. I learned so much in that, and it was so amazing. And it was and they were talking about a lot of stuff that I'm saying, and they were saying from their own mouths of, hey, some of these strategies aren't good. And this was right in the middle of it. They're saying like, hey, like, and they were trying. And what I loved about it was they directed traffic so beautifully. If you want to learn this, if you genuinely want to care, here's some good resources. Go to this. Go to Chloe Valderi. She's doing amazing work. Go to I'm blanking on names right now, but all these people, and they kind of gave you good resources. And I followed those resources, and I learned so much. And it was done with compassion, and it wasn't belittling my ignorance, because they recognize this is just ignorant. You're not a bad person. You just don't know. And they framed it like that, and I learned so much. And then they were also showing the same things I'm saying here, but so much more eloquent and so much better, which is why I struggle with this, because I feel like I hear these people say these points that I'm now trying to pare it back to you, and I'm butchering it and not making the points. That's why I keep stumbling upon them.
I'm getting the gist of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, the frustration comes in when resources like this have existed for, this is not a new thing.
No, not at all. Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Black Intellectual Society, like having these conversations is not new. This has been happening for years and years and years.
Yeah. And before that happened, I wasn't diving into these, trying to find these resources, like you say, right?
The frustration builds up when you've tried the peaceful method, and I'm not advocating for the aggression.
I agree. Yeah.
But the frustration builds up when and we're talking about Black Lives Matter, but you can talk about
in anything,
the farmers' protests in India. You can talk about Muslims being slaughtered by Buddhist monks in I forget what the name of it, in Myanmar, but yet it's
also China now.
But it's still the Muslims that are the terrorists, and not Buddhism is the religion of peace.
For sure.
Like the frustration builds up when educational resources exist and have existed for a while, and you see the influence that they can have on people like yourself, but still
the issues still come up, and
the issues still keep coming up. Things never seem to change, and it's been happening for hundreds of years.
For sure.
So I feel like as a society, you reach tipping points where something aggressive will happen, and you'll reset, and then now it'll build up again until the next great thing happens, and then the next thing happens, and the next thing happens, and hopefully somewhere along the way, our generations will become educated enough to figure out that, oh, now all of us know what is happening in society and what the oppressions are and what the struggles people are going through. Why don't we change these things? And that's all you can do. And I've been through that thought process millions of times before, where I've tried to find out how I can help. How me as an individual can start to make actual change. And that's just, you just have to focus on, for me at least, this is what works, is just influencing the bubble around you. Talking to people, educating, making sure they're aware, of the things that you go through on a daily basis and how that affects your actions and thoughts and processes. Why you feel uncomfortable with something, why you feel comfortable with something. Things as simple as when I go into work and people mispronounce my name, being like, no, that's not my name.
Right.
This is my name. I will say it and not feel shame in saying it over and over again until you get it right.
Right. Which me and you have done multiple times, and I've got it wrong multiple times.
And that's fine. And it's a different language. I understand. Like you know what I mean?
But it's about the effort.
It's about the effort. If you show me the effort, that's all that matters, because I'm showing effort talking to you, learning your name.
Sure.
I grew up speaking English, but like I grew up my entire life surrounded by brown people.
But going back to that point that you made earlier, that very North American thing about not understanding that. Now, there's so many people that have never been outside of their little bubble, and they don't understand that you are doing you are putting in so much effort. They just think, no, you're doing what everybody does. I've never seen anything otherwise. They don't see the effort that you're putting in because they don't understand the difference,
where
right?
You come from,
exactly.
What your narrative is. And that's what I was talking about, like educating yourself and realizing what privilege you have. Privilege is not, privilege is a very interesting topic.
Yeah, it's a hot button word.
It's
right
a
now.
hot button word, sure, but I mean,
but there's a lot of
layers to it.
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
a lot of layers to it. Man.
I agree.
There's a person I used to know in university who was he's from the subcontinent, and I hadn't spoken to him since second year, right? 10 years have passed since we had last met or spoken. And he reached out to me on Facebook like 3 or 4 months ago, or 3 or 4 weeks ago, sorry. And he had fallen on some hard circumstances. He was out on the streets. He needed some help. And the messages were kind of incoherent. So I was like, okay, this person's going through something. I'll try to help them out. I met with him, helped him out as best as I could. And I was just talking to him about how he came to be in the situation, because him and I, both international kids, both in engineering, same sort of circumstances. One's life has gone one way, one's life has gone the other way. And the conversation that I had with him was about, well, aren't there like shelters that you can go to or resources that you can access and stuff like that? And what his experience was that a lot of those things have systemic issues with them that cater that kind of stuff towards people that are not of color, or people that are not international, people that are not from a certain religion. And this is his like actual experience, like being, abused physically and emotionally in these shelters, to the point where he would rather stay on the streets in minus 35 than be in a homeless shelter. Yeah. Like privilege exists on every level of society, even on that level. Yeah. And you having to be aware of that, it can only better your response to social problems. It cannot worsen them. Yeah, for sure. And I agree. And I think maybe that's one point where I never made the point well enough of I talked about where sometimes I disagree with the methods of what they're doing. I haven't really given you a good example of what I mean. I feel like that's one where the word institutional racism, right? The way it's been bandied about is such a real thing. And if you take people through, I feel like there is so many places where institutional racism is real. But in what they did is they said, oh, it's in everything and it's everywhere. And what that did is devalue. So now it was like, oh, I got so excited. So it's like, oh, we're finally going to address, red zoning laws and the effects of them and all these things, right? And it's like the real institute that puts it in the forefront, not real, but the ones having huge impact on the people on the ground right now. And by spreading it and calling it in all these other things, we're taking away the value. It's kind of like what's happened with the word rape. And again, now we're just getting into more and more topics that we're trying to get out of. But I think what happens is by calling everything, and not just in the actual terms, but just the way people throw it about, like, oh, I went and got a new loan, I got raped, right? Like that kind of thing. It really devalues what it is. But I think that's the same thing with all these terms, is that's where I see them doing harm. It's like, oh, you're going after the Aunt Jemima shit. Like, I see, and it does have value. It's not to say it doesn't have value, but there's so many bigger issues right now that by causing this huge fuss over something that isn't going to show real gains now hurts your progress, because now everybody, all these allies, all these white people that are saying, hey, we did it. We get to bad. We killed racism. We got rid of anti. No, we didn't do anything. We haven't changed. Well, it's the same. Performative. It's performative, and it's the same strategy about getting people fighting between right and left, so they don't realize that, hey, it's not right and left, it's up and down, it's poor and rich, right? It's the same thing on this. Oh, it's going to cost us a lot of money and a lot of our power to fix these real institutional racism that is actually affecting people. Let's give them some easy wins. Let's give them the Aunt Jemimas. But I feel like there's so many people that are funneling people towards it because it's easy, right? And so much of the world just goes for the easy fixes. This thing is not an easy fix. It never was an easy fix. We knew it wasn't an easy fix, and the people that were really from the start wanting to make change, those true activists, not the performative activists, the true ones understood that and went at it. And I feel like that is what I want to draw attention to. But what happens is I feel like I've learned, like I said, I'm just parroting this from smarter people than I that have said this and it's really resonated with me. And I hope I'm doing a half decent job that people understand kind of what I'm trying to say. But what I see happens is kind of that point where I said you get just labeled, if you disagree with anything at all, even if it's just kind of the pretty reasonable pushbacks I've given, keeping in saying that I agree with everything else, you still get labeled this brush. Like Heather and Brett Weinstein, I've brought them up so many times, but they're just such beautiful people and they care so much and they keep bringing these things up, but they get called alt-right, and they are the most lefty. They're from Portland, Oregon. They taught at Evergreen College for 15 years, one of the most progressive colleges. Brett Weinstein got kicked out of one of the highest prestige universities in the States because he stood up for women's rights and blew the whistle on some bad things that were happening. Like, just these amazing people, but they get painted with this brush because we're so focused on, hey, we don't want conversation right now. We want action, right? We don't want to hear what you think about the strategy. You get on board with this strategy, right? And I feel like that is where I see the breakdown. And that's not everywhere, and that's definitely overgeneralizing even myself. But
I feel like I just worry about that because now is that pushing back from people like myself that I want to help, but if you say the only way I can help is with that strategy where I see harm in it and I feel like it's not happening, well, now that discourages me from helping.
Yeah, but then you find an avenue.
Yes, which I did. But I worry that some other people wouldn't because you talked about it already. That flame can get extinguished, right? We talked about it in school, but you're really passionate about this.
I agree with you. I agree with you that the flame can get extinguished, but it's not, again, it's the people who are fighting oppression.
Right. Yeah.
It's not their duty to keep your flame alive.
For sure.
Your flame should be alive because of the atrocities that are happening.
And I don't think it's their duty, but I don't think they're aware that their actions are like they want all these allies,
fair.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't think they realize that there's some small tweaks to their strategy they can make that would actually help bring in allies where I think right now they think they are, but they're pushing people away at points. And it's not everybody. And again, this is kind of an overgeneralization. And I feel like it has shifted. I feel like I wanted to make this point when you're talking about I so agree with the peaceful methods didn't work. And at a certain point, you got to shake shit up, right? I was so on board with that. When those riots first started happening, I was so behind, and then 5 days in, I'm still pretty behind, 10 days in, and then Portland, they're still rioting 100 days later at the court. And it's like, you guys are doing something different, right? You have now co-opted that cause and gone after something different. And it was just like seeing things like that, but not being able to call it out and say it's not that I want to call it out because I don't believe in the cause. It's because I do believe in the cause. I want to call that out to make sure that we're actually moving forward and something that's causing harm to it isn't holding us back from the real progress we could be making, right? So it's just one of those things. I don't think we're going to solve it today. I don't think there is. I think you've again and again brought this back to the point I think that needs to make. It's all about just putting in a little bit of effort and doing that. I think we're taking it past that, but all that stuff is semantics we could argue about. It does just come back to that little bit of effort you put in. People understand effort and they see it, right?
People understand effort, man. Like that's the takeaway is really that people, all they want is for you to try. Try to understand where they're coming from. Be compassionate, be empathetic, try to understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. Try to understand their atrocities. Don't dismiss them at face values. It's stuff like that. And not feeling like it's a taboo topic to talk about, right? Like having this conversation is I view it as positively impacting someone's view of this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so when it really boils down to is just affecting people in your bubble with your information, your education, stuff that you feel strongly about, how you think that things should happen. Like that is all you can do,
right?
Because the vast majority of people in this world don't have, again, the means or the wealth necessary to cause a larger effect, right? Venture capitalists' bubbles are much larger than you and I, right? They can cause a lot more exponentially large impact that we can. At this point.
Yeah. For sure.
But I mean,
give us a couple years.
You can only do what you can do.
Exactly.
And I think that's really the takeaway is that it's just affecting your bubble the best that you can, being kind, being compassionate to people who are struggling with things that you may not struggle with on a daily basis.
Right.
That alone, that compassion does more tangible good than you will know to that person.
Agreed. And I think just to add on to that, I agree with that 100% and beautifully said, T. But I think also to be said is that bubble's different for everybody. Sometimes that bubble of effect, if you're somebody who's not very sure of yourself and you live in a community, like I always let's use Athabasca, just so I'm not throwing my hometown under the bus like I always do, but just any small rural town, right? That is a scary thing to stand up for, right? When the entire society's the other way.
Definitely.
To be that one person standing up in there. So maybe that's one, maybe you can't, every time you hear something, you can't stand up every time at that point, but maybe there's your mom at home, or maybe there's somebody in your life or somebody, one of your good friends where you have that. Maybe that's your bubble of effect, right?
Dude,
and then
totally.
And see how that makes, and just something I want to expand this with is see how that makes you feel, and then how happy with that bubble. Is there things you can do to expand that bubble of effect, right? Like for myself, I felt all these things, right? Maybe because the podcast I think all of these kind of things, right? I was so frustrated with that. My bubble isn't big enough, right? I have so much things that I want to say and effect I want to have, but I can't because my bubble's only this big. So I thought, well, and that's what kind of led to that depression. I was just so overwhelmed, right? You talked about the start. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the what we're facing, right? We're just up against so much structures and power structures that are in place for hundreds of years that we're up against this, and how are we ever going to make a change? it all starts by doing what you can do. And I felt like I am doing everything I can do, and it's not making any difference. Things aren't changing, right? I see the Joe Rogans of the world and the Lex Friedmans and all these people out on being the first against the wall, and they're actually making a difference. But then I decided, okay, well, if you're unhappy with your bubble of effect, change it.
It's a good point.
Change it.
If you have the means to do it.
If you have the means,
absolutely. I think there's like I said, if you have the means to do it, do it. What you need to realize is that a lot of people are struggling with
everything, life
in general, not having the means to do it, or there's a vast majority of people in the world who are just surviving day to day from attacks against their home, against their property, attacks on their religion.
Yeah.
So that might not be the highest priority for them,
sure,
right?
For sure.
Which is where you recognizing your privilege and the fact that you don't have to worry about all those things can cause a bigger effect.
For sure.
Slightly off topic from like race and religion, but I mean, I've been in oil and gas for 6-7 years now, almost, right? And just seeing, I really went into it hoping that I could contribute to upgrading processes to make them greener, to make them more sustainable for future generations, to make them, while still maximizing the fuel that our economy runs on, or that our products run on.
Yeah.
But constantly shifting it a little bit more progressive, shifting it a little greener, a little greener, a little greener, trying to do that. And I realized that I was in the wrong kind of field, kind of role for that.
Right.
It would take me a long time
to show any effect,
to do anything that I would want to be tangibly proud of. And so I recently actually applied to grad school, or am applying to grad school. I'm just finishing up my application, and it's in this concept called industrial ecology. And this is, it's kind of off topic, but it's essentially it's a degree that focuses on areas like decarbonization, circular economies, sustainable growth, taking the linear model of consumption that we have, that we buy something, then we throw it away, and then it just never gets. Some of it gets reused, some of it doesn't get reused. It's a linear model, and changing that into more of a cyclical process to mimic what happens in nature. So that's really the concept behind it, and I found, when I was reading up on actual tangible things that had been done with this study, or with this
industry
field, that you see in like regular
day-to-day
life, they cause huge impacts.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, okay, well, I have the means necessary to go get this program, to get these skills, get this knowledge. So I'm going to try and do that. Yeah. And position myself a little better into achieving goals where I preach about, where I'm like, affect your bubble, affect your bubble, affect your bubble. Yeah. Now, I've been affecting my bubble through education and conversations and stuff, but I want to do more. So I'm not, and realizing that I have the means necessary to do it, I'm going to try and do it. Right. I feel like I'm putting myself up on a pedestal, but I feel like if more people thought like that, and not that more people don't, but if that was the overwhelming majority of people that thought, or that's the thought process that they had in this world, we would be living in a much kinder, much more, accepting society.
And talking about circles, I think the reason what you just said, I think it goes back to our first part of our conversation about education, about that in your head of seeing something you want, figuring out a strategy to get to that point so that you can still be a productive member of society, but do it in some way that's going to bring you doing something you enjoy, chasing a passion, right? You're chasing something that's important to you. And I feel like that is what's so missing. So it's hard, I agree with you. If more people did that, but I feel like that comes back to that same conversation about we need to start finding ways to encourage people to think of that mindset and to raise up that onto a pedestal in itself, right? Money isn't always the end goal.
It's the process.
It's the process, right? Like it's about chasing something that's going to bring you contentment and joy.
The actual
right?
time that you spend doing that thing is going to bring you contentment, not the end result.
Exactly. Like,
I think is the
like I graduated from university and quite quickly was into a role where if you could ask me at 15 what I hope to do at 30 and what I would have described, I want to make this much money, I want to have this truck, I want to have that. I had that at 23. Yeah. Again, this sounds awful to say. It sounds like you're bragging, but it's not. But I realized that didn't make me happy. It was okay. I have all this. I won. Where's all the balloons? Like this is really fun to start because I was learning. It was all new, and then it starts being less new and it's more tedious and it's the same thing and it's definitely a job. And, well, this isn't that. And then I do something like this where I make no money. I lose a lot of money. We had this conversation before. You're looking at these nice microphones and stuff. It's just because I love it. But I was telling Brendan before he got here, maybe even you were here, but since the pandemic started, I would say of the top 1% happiness times that I've had since the pandemic started, I'd say 95% of them were in this room, right? You can't put a dollar amount on that. You can't put a dollar amount on that. I'd waste money all the time. I'd get every dollar I make at this great job that I do during the day, I would piss it all away to just have the enjoyment of this. And that's what's important. And then hopefully that passion will resonate with people and people will listen to it and people will enjoy it. And then hopefully eventually I can make this so I don't need to make that dollar amount doesn't need enough. I would live like I loved Lister in that little, 6x6 room, that little prison cell. I was perfect because I had my people around. I had food. I was fine. I don't need much, right? And I realized that I was trying to get all this money so I could, I don't need much. You give me a nice computer in a little room and video games
and the overpriced 3 chicken finger wrap from the market.
Hey, you gotta have it.
We need that. Yeah.
I think we might have to, after this podcast, run to the market. Oh, it's probably not even open right. I grab an old 3 chicken finger wrap. Oh, so good, so good. But yeah, that is what the importance is. And actually, before the Zoom recorder died, I said I had 2 ideas for education. One was, I don't know if because I think the Zoom died during this, was that having someone in a position to keep a lookout for those special kids that don't fit the mold and are already dreamers from there. And instead of letting them stay in that system where they're going to try and crush those dreams and mold you into this worker bee from a dreamer, let's pull you out of that system. Let's keep that dream, that fire alive in you, and not have it down. And let's try and feed. Let's throw a little bit of wood on that fire.
Well, it's a great point. And the number one holdback is allocation of resources.
100%.
If you allocate more resources to education and to public service, you are going to get more people like that who will cause more impact. That's just it just makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what's really sad about
wealth hoarding.
Let me rephrase that. That is what is really sad, because you see tangible examples of that happening in the world, where there is a direct correlation between allocation of resources towards education, early education and secondary education, and how progressive those societies are as a result of it. There are actual tangible examples. Most of them exist in Europe. And yes, there's other factors that go into it, sure. But at the end of the day, they had the money, they spent the money on education, and as a result, they're better because of it. That's just it.
And once you know that, and once that's been proven, now every time you're not doing that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Every time you're not doing that, you are choosing not to be that progressive.
It's the same conversation we had before we started recording. I think about Jeff Bailey. When you have that much money, and to know that such a small piece could do this, right? And we talked about the excuses of why they don't, but there's some accountability of now there's been proven things that can make a huge difference with a small amount of resources, right? Yeah. And we're not doing it. So you have to look at both sides of it. And then the second idea I had, because what I found was finding podcasts was so impactful to my education, and not just my education, my knowledge growth, but my personal growth, and showing me lessons and teaching me strategies to look inside myself and find who I am. I mean, I feel like we haven't connected as much since we graduated and kind of went, I moved to Grand Prairie and all that stuff. I probably seem like a pretty different person to you, right? And I imagine I would be to everybody, because who I was back then was so much controlled by my ego, and it still is, driving the bus all the time and that. But every once in a while, give them a tap on the shoulder and let me drive for a bit, and I can, get in there. And I'm trying more and more to take that, but that's all due to podcasts. I feel like that lesson about the ego and those types of things is what's missing from the education system big time. And I feel like where the only place you're seeing those conversations is in this podcast space. So now, and their only goal of these podcasts is for now, right? But because it came up without, it wasn't a big money maker. Now people see $100 million deal by Joe Rogan. They see dollar signs that are jumping into it. But if you rewind back of people that have already had a podcast for, let's say, over 6 years, so that they started it when it wasn't nothing. They started because they loved it. You take your top 100, the Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, Tim Ferriss, all these guys, right? Jordan Peterson, all these people, you take your top 100 of them that all they were trying to do is help. And now you make that and you say, somehow you need to find a way to bring these people into your curriculum. You see teachers all the time. Will Rushi is a teacher down in California that is using podcasts in his curriculum, introducing people to people like Joe Rogan to learn these life lessons. Even people like Joey Diaz, who's a cocaine fiend for 30 years and just has life lessons. I learned more from Joey Diaz than I have in any classroom ever, just from listening to that. I think we're going to see it. I think where I said that first idea of having somebody go in, I feel like that's kind of a pipe dream. I don't think that's ever going to happen, or it's very far down the road. I think because the issue is, it doesn't pay for itself quick enough, right? You're not going to see the results. They don't want to see the results of, hey, this in 20 years, the side of capital. I think we're going to see it's so low. There's no cost to putting, they're already recorded. They're on YouTube. They're available to everybody. All we need to do is to show the value of them, because I feel like people just think there's some frivolous thing and they don't understand the knowledge. Unless you are in the space, you understand, like someone like me that has gotten something from you don't understand it's there. It's this orchard of fruit that just is sitting there. I'm the only one in eating apples. I'm trying to call people, hey, come over here. It's great, right? And everyone's stuck in their universities at their desks and like, just getting these little measly one gummy a day of food, and you're in this orchard full of knowledge and nobody's there, and you're trying to call people over. I feel like it's just a matter of time until that tidal wave comes in and we see that. My worry is that they're going to find these people that start a podcast for the educational space, and they just take the old model of what education was and put it into a podcast format and think that's what it's going to solve. And they'll miss the point completely. But I think that's why I specified it as people that started podcasts before it became a money-making thing, and the people that did it for the love of what it was. I think there's so much specialness and so much learning lessons that is going to change the world, and that is what's going to show the kids that there is a different way, right? There's ways that you can chase dreams, because pretty much everybody that started a podcast that reached a certain way, they chased a dream at one point. Now at least you have something to balance it out. You have, the school curriculum is going to teach you how to be a good worker, but now we have this other thing to counterbalance of maybe that's not for you, because I think we'd be both remiss if we said that there aren't some people that are happy at being a worker and they enjoy that, and that's who they are, right? But you need to open up multiple paths, just like the NHL. You need the Wayne Gretzky path and you need the Kevin Hayes path. You need to open up more things, and I think that's what's going to bring a lot more progress to society as a whole.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think the important thing to note is that those resources maybe haven't been as available as they are now,
right?
Or over the past 5 or 6 years with the expanse of the internet. But the issue is, how do you make education aware of all of these great resources?
Right.
How do you incorporate all of these different tools and resources into your curriculum? Because it's being done around the world. It's North America is really the only one that's lacking.
And I think a big point to that too, T, is like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of people that generate a lot of power by having that structure of what education is now stay that way, right? Like you said, why don't the teachers have more input? They're the ones, right? Because there's people in place that have a lot of say in what those curriculums are, and there's a lot of use coming from that. And that is the absolute antithesis to what they're trying to do, is what I'm trying to do. So there's obviously going to be some pushback. It makes sense why it's difficult to do. I don't think that makes, just because something's difficult, that usually means
no,
it's more
I'm not
work,
saying
right?
that you shouldn't
I agree.
do it.
I agree. I was just maybe more for the audience. I was just using it.
No, that's a great point. I talk to my mother about this all the time, and she talks about how she has students that are, they're brilliant. Like you can tell by their writing. She's an English teacher. So she's always into promoting authors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she sees that kind of stuff, and then she also sees students that are maybe not as technically gifted in English arts, but they're going to do something else, or they're going to be a productive member of society, or they're just going to be a regular dude, right? Yeah. But she's not able to cater her giving education to these people to all 35 kids, because it's one educator for 35 kids. Yeah. And so if that is something that is really important to society's progression as a whole, I think with the progress of generations, with people you and I, going through life and eventually ending up in positions where we are the people, or our generation is the generation that is setting the curriculums, or in the position to cause tangible
the heads
change.
of universities,
right? Like the Yelenas of the world. Like, you know what I mean? Like
100%.
When those people our generation gets to that point, I think you'll see change. We won't live long enough to see that change.
Right.
It's, where we don't have to talk about this issue at all. The other thing that I want to mention, since we're talking about my mom, is, she's been an educator for 25 years now. She doesn't have a master's. right? She has a bachelor's and she has a certificate in teaching from a foreign university. She's really relied on her 25 years of experience.
Yeah.
And most people that do that don't necessarily evolve with the times. She has really evolved her teaching method. She's always been willing to try something new out if there's tangible proof that it's going to cause a benefit, right? Recently, just as a birthday gift, I got her the masterclass series that is like insanely popular.
Yeah.
She saw like a couple episodes of like Margaret Atwood talking about writing and how the creative process works and stuff like that. And she's already incorporated that into freaking curriculum, teaching that to grade 10 and grade 12 kids. Like that kind of stuff is important.
Yeah.
Right? Constantly a teacher, a vet of 25 years who has done things one way, like theoretically speaking, not my mom, but theoretically speaking, is not going to want to change.
No.
Because they're like, this is my way. This is how I've always done it. And this
especially
is
if you're not getting paid that much. You take a teacher that's getting underpaid and they have to bust ass with us and they're dealing with all this bullshit. They're going to want to go, they're going to do what's easy, right? Because you're not incentivizing them to want to grow.
Exactly, because you run the risk of then not having job security if you do things your own way. And my mom has been very lucky. My family has been very lucky that my dad was in the military. So we had a stable income and housing and all that stuff.
Right.
So that she could
take those swings
stuff.
and
take those swings, take those misses, and be really confident in herself. Because I can see an alternate timeline where her job is crucial to paying the bills at the house.
Yeah.
And her just like not pursuing this kind of like individuality to incorporate every single new thing that can cause benefit.
Yeah.
Like I can if I play that out in my head, I can see that happening, but that's where the whole conversation comes back is like, why don't we make these essential services like public health and public education self-sustaining from a financial point of view so that the people who are in these professions are truly in it to help the kids.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to worry about the money that's coming in.
Yeah.
Right? Earlier I said, people say that they're in it for the kids. Fuck that. It's a profession. Yes, they're spending their time and investing their energy and resources for a paycheck. But what if that paycheck was that is because that the paycheck is not large enough to actually sustain their life, right?
Right.
What if that wasn't a point of concern for them? What if they go to their work and at the end of the day, they know, okay, I'm getting paid enough. I can live comfortably. I don't have to worry about taxes. I don't have to worry about debt. I don't have to worry about medical bills. I don't have to worry about, in Canada, we're lucky that we don't have to really worry about medical bills. But like in the States, you can't have a freaking child without putting yourself through insane amounts of debt. Imagine how fucked that is.
I know that didn't occur to me until like a couple of years ago. I'd never even thought of that. Just living in Canada, you're so privileged to have healthcare. I'd never even thought of that. Like, man, going and having a baby and that costs you $8,000. Like, holy, they're expensive enough. Like, Jesus.
So my point is that there's enough wealth in the world that you can work towards redistributing it into sectors that really, really need it.
Right. Just have to be careful with that.
Just have to be careful. Absolutely. You have to
be smart about
frame it, and you have to frame it in a way that it doesn't feel like a handout. You're
and it needs to be transparent and it needs to be accountable.
Absolutely. But at the end of the day, there just needs to be more resources flowing towards these important sectors of our society, because that's really what is going to save us from killing each other.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned that really stuck out to me was hearing you say that your mom had the stability to be able to take those swings. And that's what helped her stay a good teacher. I don't think that, when you have a bad teacher, it's usually they were a good teacher at one point, but that fire got quenched, right? Or they just didn't take those swings because they needed that security. And what I said about Mr. Thompson taking that swing in that classroom to say, hey, I don't think this is right. I want to give you the freedom to do this. Those two teachers that made that hockey class, they had to take a risk. They had to stick their neck out for that. It's something about, I think we need to, this just occurred to me in the moment. I haven't thought this through very much, but almost it seems like we need to loosen up the curriculum and just give teachers more accountability. Give teachers, say, this is the rough things you need to teach, but figure your own way out and give them a little bit more autonomy.
I think if you do that, you'll find that more teachers will step up to the mantle.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's it.
And now that would take it from being just a fallback degree. You get your curriculum, you just have to teach it to them. After you do it for 4 years, you pretty much have it down. You know what you're teaching. Now you have that freedom, and now it's on you. It's if a classroom of kids comes out and they're shitty, we don't look at it. It's the education system. It's not that teacher. But now you change that. Now it's the onus is on the teacher. Now they are. if a classroom comes out and they're amazing and these kids are, that is what I think is so going to be so powerful about podcasts entering the education system. I think they're going to find, what happens if we have kids start listening to Joe Rogan. I think they're going to see the tangible results of in 10 years, these kids are all on much better trajectories because there's real lessons that aren't getting taught, right? And I just use Joe Rogan as an example. There's a million people who could substitute for that. But I think a system like that, you would start to see the real results of which teachers are preparing kids for life, right? Mm-hmm. It's not this curriculum is preparing them for life. The teachers should be, right? Like, it's all about how the message is communicated to you.
Yeah, you definitely need. We're simplifying it, but you definitely need buy-in from parents.
Oh, yeah,
to be wanting to have their kids go through that, and that's why I think it's going to take a long time, because I'll want my kids to go through that. I'll want my kids' educators to be able to shape my kids'
have some
lives.
Skin in the game. And
absolutely. I will want that, but I can see my parents not wanting that.
Yeah.
Or like my generation's parents not wanting that.
Yeah, and that's just that change that comes with
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but it will only happen if we allocate resources. Mm-hmm. Is my
for sure.
Animal. Yeah. Like there needs to be a recalibration.
At all levels.
At all levels. And it's not like you're reinventing the wheel there either. There's tangible examples of societies in the world that have done this and have done this very successfully.
Yeah.
And so you can take from them and you can draw from them. And again, the failure to do so is an indictment on the people in charge.
Yeah. Oh, you stroke my own little heart in there. I think so much of this pandemic stuff, I think so much of these failures are an indictment, but there's no accountability anymore. It doesn't matter. Nobody loses. How many politicians has lost a paycheck?
That's the thing, because as a society, we have glorified so two things. As a society, the accumulation of wealth has gone on for way too long, first of all. So there's just an insane amount of power that will take years to topple, right? First of all.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, as a society, we have glorified killing yourself over work. Working hard. I'm working 12-hour shifts and then I'm going for a workout and then I'm doing this and then I'm doing that. It's like, Jesus, man.
Yeah.
Like you do this, life should not be this hard when there is this much wealth in the world. It just should not be.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to work 3 jobs if I don't have an engineering degree to pay for food on my table.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
I agreed. It almost like the way I like to, like, this is just a thought experiment, and I'm sure there's going to be some trigger words in this thought experiment that are going to make people think of this the wrong way. But communism, we know communism fails. We've tried it. We know it fails. But the idea of it, right, like all these things, it comes from a good place of what they're trying to do. If you could imagine a world, I think that trying to enact this, it won't happen this way. It'll crumble before it could. But if you had a magic wand where you were, had all-seeing power, you're omnipotent. Thank you. If you're omnipotent and could make this all happen, and you just took all the wealth that was in the world and distributed it 100% equally, and that was the footing that everyone lived on, and just you could evaluate the standard. You couldn't do this again. I want to say communism, it doesn't work. It fails. There's no incentives. But if everybody, I feel like if we could just wave our magic wand and see one day of the amount of wealth everybody could have if you took that and redistributed out so everybody was equal. And like you say, we're so far, the technology we've had, we shouldn't have poverty. The only reason we have poverty is because that is what you need for people to ascend to those heights.
It's profitable for someone somewhere.
For somebody to make $1 trillion, there has to be poverty somewhere in the world. That is how economics work. It sounds rough to say, but if you could take that and just distribute out and see in a perfect world that we will never get to, this is what could be accomplished. This is the level. If we distribute this to everybody and we could all live and have an amazing life, right? And then we'll snap to the next day and we know we can't get there and we're still stuck in this system. I think capitalism is much better than communism in so many ways, but I do think there's some areas where it leads very naturally.
Well, I think that's. I agree with you. Yeah. I think the middle ground really is socialism, and I might get a little bit of flack for this, but I mean, you take certain aspects of communism where you talk about guaranteeing basic human rights, you talk about healthcare, right? You talk about education, you talk about guaranteeing basic income. Yeah. You're basically saying that regardless of where you're born or what circumstances you're born into, you don't deserve to freeze on the streets.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
That's really, if we can guarantee that, I don't care how much money someone else has.
Exactly.
Right? If we can guarantee, for demonstrated lack of effort, not lack of effort, for demonstrated effort and demonstrated hard work, we can guarantee healthcare, education, housing, clothing, food.
I love it.
Why not?
Exactly. And I think because people are so scared, I feel like for some reason, anything that says capitalism isn't perfect automatically becomes communism somehow, right? And it's like, no, Canada is a perfect example of that, right? We have healthcare, we have other things, but there's still a lot of capitalistic markets in there. And I feel like what the real future of what it's going to have to look like is we need capitalism everywhere, but a few places. There's a few places like healthcare, like politics,
you're talking about a socialist society right now. You realize that, right?
Right, and that's
where there's incentive for people to be rich and create products that are going to add value to the world and profit off of that. That's a perfectly acceptable part, but you're guaranteeing basic human rights like healthcare, education, clothing, housing.
Right. But then so now
not
I agree
as a
with
handout
that,
though.
But the balance of this too is in order to accomplish that, I agree that is a perfect thing, but for that to work, you need a very powerful entity in the government that does that. And to me, there's so much incompetence and there's so much corruption in it that is where that's where everything goes off the rails. You almost need socialism and libertarianism to have a baby, and that's what we need. We need minimum government, but we need big programs. We need like the least government programs to run a healthcare system, to run like publicly funded, and they need to be accountable so that they're not just wasting money like we see. Everyone right now is just on this huge thing to get rid of the UCP right now. I see it all over all my friends, and I'm like, sure, like I don't really like the UCP either, but I don't like anybody else. And you see this, they're like, oh, the medical system. It's because the NDP came in, gave all their friends like $400,000 jobs to do nothing, all these admin costs. They did what governments do. And this is what the UCP does. Like, I'm not trying to make this one or the other. They're all bad. That's what I'm saying. But to think that this is all these bad things in the world is because these guys are in power. No, it's all the same people. If they were in power, the same things would be happening, right? Like
I think that
I get frustrated when people think that it's just such an easy fix.
No, and that's a fair point. It's the problem is that humans have very short memories. So, there was atrocities during the Harper era that we don't talk about anymore because it's just so far in the past. I remember them because I was here when stuff like that was happening. There's shortcomings in the NDP government. There's shortcomings in the UCP government. There's shortcomings everywhere. I think what really disheartens people is the lack of priority the current government gives to, and I don't want to turn this into a political thing.
Yeah.
The trying to understand where people are coming from and where their frustrations are, is the lack of focus and priority that the government gives in terms of relative orders of magnitude to public sectors versus the private sector.
Right.
That feels disingenuous to most people.
I agree, but to me, I think both sides, I couldn't agree more with that, but I think that it's wool pulled over your eyes if you think that every party isn't doing that.
And I'm not saying that.
Right. And I don't think you are, but I'm more making that argument. That's where my frustration is. I feel like to see that in one party and to be blinded to seeing it in your own, like whatever, it's just tribalism, and it's very natural. And we know, we've looked into this. We know why people do this and why. I've talked my head off on terror management theory and why, and the protections and the values, and that's your tribe and you stick to it. And when people attack that is attacking who you are as a core being. That's what you built your things around, why this stuff happens. But to me, we need to wake up and say like, hey, this whole system where we just have these governments that get elected on the backs of money from all these corporations that don't have our interest. None of them do. NDP doesn't have the public interest. Liberals don't have. It used to be. None of these people have the best interest at heart because the system. They're not bad, and they're not bad people. I feel like that's the other side. People just think I'm against politics. It's not the people. It's the system. It's just, like I said, like I think you need capitalism everywhere except a few points. I think healthcare. I think politics is one of those things. I think that's where it goes bad. It's a natural progression of these incentives to get you to this point of corruption where, why would they do what the public good is when they get elected, not by the public, they get elected by the people paying them to run these things. And if you don't have Facebook's information on people and what they've built up your character to try and run against, you're almost dead in the water because that's the power. But now you see they get elected with that, and now they're beholden to these people. So now you didn't elect them, you just elected Facebook, right? Like you just elected Amazon, you just elected this thing. But the solution to that is, okay, so then we'll elect the other guy. Because now you elect the other guy, you just elected Facebook because they're all using the same people and they're all getting money from them. And it's the big pharma, and it's all these people that have their own interests, right? And they're not bad people. They're part of that system that is making them do that. They're beholden to shareholders. They're just saying, hey, within this system that you guys have set up, we need to kill people with the opioid crisis because that is the best way we can make money for our shareholders. Correct. And that's their defense, right? Correct. They know. They said, we're gonna build $800 billion into our budget for lawsuit costs because we know we're going to get sued, and we can guess, it's probably going to be somewhere in 200 to 300 billion range. So we're going to calculate it. We're going to make sure we make enough to calculate that in. So there's no consequences, right? And they know. So then to us, they go, well, that's bullshit. So now why now they didn't get punished because they built it in. So now what needs to change? So now it would regard the politicians would have to change the rules of the game in order for them to feel real punishment. But
at some point you need politicians to show some spine and do that.
But the system pulls their spine. If how politics works is to move up a level, they have to pull out a vertebrae out of that spine, right? If you want to move up to the municipal, okay, here's a vertebrae, right? And by pulling that vertebrae out, it's the corruption, it's the taking money, it's the playing the game for you to move up, so that by the time you get to the top, the only people there are spineless for that reason, because it's a feature, not a bug. It's baked into that system to make sure that it gets, because that's how they keep the power. That's what keeps anything from changing, right? Mm-hmm. You see what happens. So I think anybody that bingo card has me mentioning Brett Weinstein 6 times on a podcast, I get to bingo dab it. But he came up with this during this election cycle in the US. He saw this, right? And very clearly laid this out. It's the same people that win, whether Trump or Biden wins. It's the same people. These same issues are going to happen. And they're getting away with it by getting you to fight with each other and not realize this, right? So he started this party called the Unity Party. Mm-hmm. And what he wanted to do was last minute, right? He only started a couple months before and tried to get a groundswell of support for it to bring 2 people that are going to run in as running mates. And if they run for a second term, they switch. So if you're president and vice president, then you switch for the next one, trying to get one from each side of the political spectrum that have spines that are uncorruptible, like the Tulsi Gabbards of the world. Mm-hmm. They were kind of going for Dan Crenshaw, but the things I've seen out of him lately, he seems to kind of be, might have lost a few vertebrae in the last couple of months here, but you can see it. And that's a lot. But what I liked about him was when he first came in, because he was a war vet and he came into the system and he was fresh to it, and you could see, and he had that spine and he would stand up and he would say this, and now you see, he's been in it. Okay, now he's been in the system 2 more years, and you see that spine get pulled away. But there's certain people like Tulsi Gabbard that are uncorruptible. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say it. So far uncorruptible. But what they did is now they called her a Russian asset, and they, Hillary Clinton came out again because they don't care what your politics are. They frame everything within a right and left framework when it's really institution versus anti-institution, right? And I love there's a AI developer, and he came up with this thing. I think it's called like goodnews.org or whatever, or betternews.org. And it's this news site, and it's got 2 sliders, a left and a right slider, to show you the polarization of how these topics are being polarized and used for that. Mm-hmm. But then there's another one, and it's a institutional one, right? Like institutional narrative, that because you see right and left combine if there's something that's going to be taking a power, like people trying to put forward ranked choice voting. Mm-hmm. That is a threat to their power structure. It doesn't matter if that's coming from the left or right, they're going to fight it, and they're going to come together to fight it, right? Mm-hmm. And that shows the lack. And I feel like they gain their power by keeping everything in this framework of right versus left. And what the power of the people needs to come is to understand that it's actually institutional versus non-institution, right? These things that are there, right? And then you see all these people that are trying to fight for equality, and they're doing it from that right-left venture. The right is the enemy of equality, and the left is, no. They both don't care about equality either way. They care about money, right? And they care about their power structure staying in place. The overwhelming majority,
the people who are in power, care about money and power more so than they care about
100%. And there's going to be certain people inside of those institutions that are good people that want to do this, and even the people that are perpetrating it at the very top, right? Like, I don't think Joe Biden's a bad guy at the end of the day. He's just part of this system, right? Like
he survived 46 years in politics.
Exactly. What does that tell? That should tell people a lot.
Okay, so good point. And just to frame it into context, there was this outrage over Senator Loeffler dumping a lot of her stock in I think it was the Dow or something right before the pandemic news hit, right? Mm-hmm. And rightfully so.
Yeah,
she had access to insider information. Mm-hmm. She used that to her monetary advantage. Criminal. Should be persecuted.
For sure.
Should be ashamed of it. What's not common is the knowledge that Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, Speaker of the House, owns future call options in Tesla that expire in 2022. And she is pulling or is promoting pro-electrical vehicle legislation through.
Yeah.
She can frame it as this is better for the environment, this is better, this is this, that. Agreed. But why do you have future call options in Tesla? Because now I can't trust that you are doing this for the right reasons.
Agreed.
Right? And so us on the left need to call out people on the left for doing the same things that we call out people on the right.
And people on the right need to call out people on the right for doing the shit that they call out the people on the left doing. Exactly. You know, when right-wing people go after, try to cancel people and stuff, you got to call it out. That's that bullshit that you just spent years saying. Like, and that's what's the frustration of stepping outside of that framework. You see it on both sides. And that's what's so frustrating is so many of my friends just think that the solution is we just need to keep, going further and further left and who are elected, and that's going to solve these issues. But we've seen that that's never.
I think the reason that they think that is because, not that the left hasn't had polarizing figures in the past in power, but the last 4 years, when you have someone as polarizing as Donald Trump in power, and of the right, when you say you are right or Republican or conservative, you are automatically affiliated with an endorsement of that candidate. And that's what's really harmful. I think he's done more harm to normal people who are conservative. For sure. And their relationships with people as opposed to, them actually being bad people.
But I do think I agree with that, but I think to a degree, some people use that as a compliment because I saw so much of this before 2016. There was so much of this was bubbling much before that. Cancel culture, all this stuff was definitely apparent. It definitely got a magnifying glass put onto it, right? But here's the other piece of it too, is nobody watched politics. Me and you might have kept track, but the everyday Joe, they don't care about politics, right? They're voting on maybe one or two issues. They don't really care. What Trump did was make everybody focus on it, right? And what that did was let them play their game of that. Let's get everybody fighting right through left. Because now it used to be, that was always the game. But it was only the people that really love politics got them going. Those are the people that were fighting the battle. But then Trump comes in and now all of a sudden everybody gets called to battle. We got farmers with their business coming into this. We got, people coming out of their ivory towers in downtowns that have never thought about politics in their life, have no knowledge about politics, but entered this battle because that's what they want, right? And the more and more that separation of the wealthy and the poor, the good and the bad stretches, the more they have to amp up this fighting because the more it becomes apparent and it's harder to hide that from people.
I mean, you want to talk about the poor and the rich and that class divide. There's no better example in recent U.S. history than Donald Trump of someone who has profited off that exploitation.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, the only counter argument I would say is
not saying that there's people on the left that haven't done that.
Yeah, I would say my argument would be every president, I would say before Trump, who would you say that about? To me, it'd be Obama.
Yeah.
And then before Obama, who'd you say that about? I'd say that about Bush. Before Bush?
Every single one.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's just, we see that, I think that is just the power structure of what that person does when they're in that position. That's what the whole thing is meant to do. It gets you to that point. And then as progress goes and technology goes, your area of effect, that bubble that you can affect grows and grows. So now the next person, I think at the end of Biden's term, whenever he's done, or if he makes it, I don't know. Yeah. I think he's going to be the person that benefited off because just society, the magnifiers we're talking about have grown, and that taking advantage of it is just every next person up is going to be that next person.
But the key difference,
I think that doesn't dispute your point because I think that was always going to happen. And even if Trump didn't do all that crazy and was a good president, he still would have been that. But then he doubled down on top of it and actively said, hey, we're all playing this game pretending that we're not doing this. I'm going to actually do it and be upfront about it and say, yeah, I'm taking advantage of all this shit and said it so that it seems way worse. And he polarized it and weaponized it. But I think he still would have been that even if he didn't. And I think going forward, we're still going to see that with everyone going forward.
Right. The key difference is that he was that person before politics.
Yeah.
And that was very obvious.
And he's still that person after, right?
That person after politics. Like he has a demonstrated history. His organizations have a demonstrated history of exploitation against people of color.
He wrote a book on it. He wrote a book on this is my methods. You get multiple people, you get them bidding against each other. You find somebody, you get them to do half the work, you cut them, you find someone cheaper. It's exploitation, right? That is his business model. That's what he said, right? Like, I'm not arguing that. And he is, the other thing I didn't like about the left's reaction to Trump was they did more harm to the cause of getting Trump out of office than anybody else was the left, because they were so hypocritical and all the, oh, he's an idiot, he's a buffoon, he doesn't know. Oh, he's this intelligent mastermind doing all these things. And they were just okay, they were arguing against, they didn't realize it, but over the 4 years, they argued against themselves. They would make the same points in reverse all the time because it was just, it doesn't matter if this argument holds water or not. Trump is the bad guy, so we're just going to go after him.
Yeah.
There was so many arguments that held water that just got put down. And what I found was the arguments that they could really use against Trump that were really powerful, they wouldn't use because they were doing the same thing very clearly, right? So they just tried to pick the ones that seemed like they could just label with Trump and it wouldn't splash back on them, right? But if you grab the big buckets of the real corruption and stuff you could throw at Trump, you splash him, you're getting splashed too, right? Like it's that kind of thing.
I think what we're seeing increasingly now, though, I mean, we're talking about U.S. politics, but this is common across Canada as well, is that you're getting individuals who are not afraid to speak out against their own party lines. Right. So all of this, the argument that you're talking about, the argument holding water and not using the right ones, or pushing aside the ones that will hurt yourself. You're seeing a shift in parties now with younger, more progressive people coming into both sides of the aisle who aren't affected by those arguments as much as the people in power of those parties.
Yeah.
And so, again, hopefully it'll change with time. But yeah. Can't be that boring.
What? Don't worry about it. That was awesome. I love it. Hey, fair enough, brother. Hey. Well, I think it's probably just the political talk, and I don't want to keep you here I do want to keep you here all day, but I'll feel bad about it. But we got to talk a little bit of golf.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, I don't know much about golf, but my best friend Chase, he is all in, right? He's just passed his PTA. I don't know if I told you that he passed his PTA, his
that's cool.
player test.
Player aptitude test? Nice.
Yeah, player aptitude test, and he's doing all the schooling stuff for becoming an assistant pro. He's doing awesome.
Nice.
He's loving it. But the amount of like golf knowledge that is just by osmosis entering me, and the amount of like enjoyment I'm getting out of golf now has rose so much. And then also just the actual physical tips of golfing with him and him making me better at golf always makes it more enjoyable. But now I'm starting to watch. Now I fucking hate Patrick Reed now, like I know the whole story of DeChambeau. I got to see his whole thing. Oh, I got to recommend a book to you too. It's called Golf's Holy War, The Battle for the Spirit of the Game in an Age of Technology or something. It has a really long name. I might have butchered it, but something like that.
Okay.
This book absolutely changed my life on golf. Like, it is so cool. It goes through the whole history of golf. It goes through the history of teachers in golf and like pros and like TrackMans and how that got better. And it was so interesting to me that ever since then, I've been just all in on golf. So maybe just to start the subject, who's your favorite golfers?
Oh man.
See if I recognize any of these names here.
Let me frame this. So my introduction to golf was very interesting.
Is golf big in Pakistan?
It's getting bigger. Yeah.
Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate the effort.
And also that I said thank you. I meant to say like sorry. I don't know. Anyways,
thank you.
Sorry. Go on. Thank you.
So the way I started in golf was
hamstring cramp. Ooh, sorry.
That's okay. So my dad my dad played squash in his late 20s and early 30s before he stopped playing for some reason. And he played with the Navy, and he was actually very, very good in squash. When he was 39 or 40 years old, I think, he had a triple bypass surgery. And so, physical activity was very limited for him after that. And he started walking, and my mom and him would walk, like go on these long walks together. And eventually his doctor told him, well, if you enjoy walking and you enjoy hitting things with sticks, golf is something that you might be, interested in, and you might want to incorporate that into your life as just like a light exercise kind of thing. It's gotten to the point now where he golfs every morning. He golfs either 9 or 18 every morning. And then he'll golf 18 holes on the weekend. My mom fucking hates it, but he runs his own business now, so he has the time in the morning at 6 a.m. to like wake up and go play 9 holes, and then he just goes to work. Anyway, around the same time, I bought a PlayStation 2 for the first time. That was my first gaming console. That wasn't a Nintendo or whatever. And this was like right after me and my dad's surgery. We went to buy this PlayStation, and I didn't I bought FIFA and a bunch of other games, but the one game that came with it that he was trying to get rid of was Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2005. And just creeping. and so I had not played golf before this. I had not watched golf. My dad had he had bought a golf kit, but he hadn't started.
Yeah.
And so me and him started playing this freaking video game.
Yeah.
And I loved it. That's all I played. I'd never touched any of the other games on my PlayStation. Tiger Woods is the only game I played for a full 6 months straight.
Yeah.
And my dad was even crazier about it. He wasn't physically able to go start playing golf.
Yeah.
So he would stay up until 2 or 3 a.m. in the lounge, just fucking playing games. And so that was my introduction to it. And so he started playing golf, and I was like, you know what? I want to give it a shot. And I went with him to the driving range, and I just.
And how old were you at the first point swinging a club?
So this is the interesting part. I was 16.
Wow.
Yeah. So I did not start golf when people typically will start.
So you probably
golf,
got pretty good pretty quick then, hey?
Yeah. So I went
because I remember in when I first met you, I knew you as a good golfer.
Yeah. So when I started, I really just focused on golf became my sport.
Yeah.
And so over the 2 years that I was in Pakistan playing it, this is the other benefit of playing golf in Pakistan is that you can play all year round.
Yeah.
So I probably played 450, 500 rounds of golf in 2 years.
That's more than I've ever played in my life.
Yeah. It's so you get really good really fast.
Yeah.
I never had lessons. Would get random tips from playing with
everybody. You always get tips.
And then the culture in Pakistan when it comes to golf is very different. So here professionals are kind of out of reach, or you only know of the one head pro and the assistant pro that run the pro shop. In Pakistan, golf clubs are mostly run by administrative staff who are avid golfers as well, but are amateurs. The professionals purely compete in actual professional tournaments, but every club has, because there's not that many clubs, every club has 30 to 50 to 100 professionals. And they're always there.
Yeah.
They're always hanging out. And there is a little bit of a class divide where usually professionals are from a lower class than amateurs who are from a higher class because of the way golf was introduced in Pakistan. It was that old British rule, you only play it if you're rich and have you seen that movie with Shia LaBeouf on golf? It's called.
Oh no, I haven't. I know which one you're talking about.
The greatest game I ever played.
Yeah.
Watch that movie. Oh yeah. And the attitude or the class difference between professionals and amateurs that is presented in that movie is very much so what happens in Pakistan right now.
Right.
There are certain members of the amateur society or amateur sphere that look down on professionals because they're lower income and lower class, and I don't agree with that.
And to be that elite at golf, you need to put in time that it probably seems like you're wasting your time,
exactly.
Right? And if you're in that hoity-toity kind of part of society, when you're going to get in 450 games of golf.
Dude, I think that this is my own observation, but I think one of the reasons that people are so elitist about stuff like that is because they don't have the fucking skill and work ethic necessary
and the grind,
to get to that level.
Yeah.
So they look down on people,
for sure,
or they're jealous. So anyway, my dad never brought me up this way because he came from a rural background. He made himself yada yada yada, all that stuff. So that was never a theme in our household. But anyway, going back to the golf story, I never had lessons, and I befriended some professionals that were just kind of around. They would always see a 16-year-old kid playing golf, fucking let's talk to him. And I started when I was 17. I dropped from an 18 handicap down to, I think I was at a 9 or an 8 in 1 year. And then at that point in time, I started actually playing with some of the professionals. And Saturday or Sunday, my dad would go. I would primarily play with my dad, but he would go on Saturday and Sunday and play with his work colleagues and stuff because they were all at the same level. And I had gotten to a point where I wasn't playing from the same tees that they were playing from, and they played it more from a social aspect. So it was a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? You guys go ahead. I'm either going to practice or I'll just go out with someone. And so I started playing with a couple of pros who and I picked up on their work ethic, their habits, kind of how they tackle things, course management.
And it's such a mental game too. And to have that to watch it, I feel like that was obviously the tips that Chase has given me, he's definitely really changed my game just in that and like my actual swing mechanics and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's more so about knowing how to like, it's such a simple game that you'd think, just hit it as far as you can every time till you get to the hole. But like the science of laying up and picking your shots and picking your like approaches and all that, like that is something I'd never even put to words because I didn't have the temperament for golf to maybe get to that point. But to then just, like you say, just watching him do it, you pick up on those things of like, oh, he's doing that. That's a smarter play. Okay, maybe next time I'll try that.
Definitely.
Right?
And asking those questions, I think, is really important because, and this applies to things in life. Mm-hmm. If you are in a field where you see a professional who has been there for a while and has a demonstrated skill set, you could learn something from them. And asking questions is the number one way to do it. Hey, why did you, hit your 6-iron when you could have gotten your 7-iron there?
Yeah.
It's because there's wind, or because I wanted to control the trajectory, or there's plenty of green to work with, so it's a safer shot. It's all of these things that will effectively make you a better golfer. And so over that, in the summer between my second last year of high school and last year high school, senior, sophomore, those years, I played a lot of golf, and I played primarily with pros. Yeah, and that's when my game went from being a 9 handicap to a +2.
Whoa!
So
what's your handicap right now? And maybe for the people listening, because I've had Chase explain handicap to me about 12 times now, and I still don't really get it.
So the simplest way to understand a handicap is it's a measure of how good you can play.
Yeah, Chase said something like you should be able to shoot your handicap once every one in every 10 games or so.
That is theoretically So if you can play up to that level once every 10 rounds, then that's your handicap.
Right.
And so just for
I'm probably a 45.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Yeah. I would say
I could break 101 in every 10 rounds, so probably 28 handicap.
So you're probably a 20 or something like that. It's the number comes from how much over par you are for that particular course, and so if you're 18 strokes over what the par score is for that course,
and it has something to do with the difficulty of the course as well, too.
Definitely, yeah. So you take into account the actual rating of the course, so 72, 73, 74, whatever it is. You take into account the slope rating, which is how much undulation there is on the actual course. And then there's a formula, I can't remember the formula off the top of my head, but you use that formula to get an effective course rating, which is what par should be for that course.
Right.
So it could be a par 72, which is just, 4 par 5s, 4 par 3s, and the rest are par 4s. And it works out to 72 strokes, but the slope rating is 156. So it's somewhere in the mountains. So it becomes more tough because there's elevation change to gain with.
Like me and Chase went and played over Christmas in Phoenix. We went down, me, him, and my dad, and we played all these courses, right? And then on the last day, we went and golfed TPC Scottsdale, right? And they had all the stats up. It was cool. So we golfed probably 5 different courses there, in the one flat, 72 handicap, 72 handicap, or handicap par.
Yeah.
The difference of like a 72 at one place and a 72 at another, like the difficulty, like bunkers everywhere.
It's massive,
It's so massive. It's not even like, it almost makes it so like after realizing that, it almost seems silly to even have like those numbers be like any reference because it's so like.
Definitely. And so that's where the equalization comes into play, is the slope rating and the actual par rating. And sidebar, this is why I think it's the greatest sport in the world, because you use your mind a lot more than you think.
Yeah.
And secondly, no 2 rounds are the same. No 2 shots are the same. No 2 courses are the same. Like you can legitimately go the rest of your life not playing the same course twice.
Yeah.
If you live in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Like you can do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I played with pros for a full summer, and then that's when I got really good. And originally I got accepted into University of Illinois in the States on their Urbana Champaign campus. And it was a D2 school at that point in time. And I wanted
for golf.
For golf, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So I got into D2 golf, but I couldn't afford the actual tuition.
Right.
It was like $50,000 a year US, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I didn't go there. And that's what I
needed something colder.
I needed something colder.
Yeah.
So I came to U of A, and what happened here was that I had been in touch with the U of A golf coach,
right?
And he had told me that he wouldn't accept me just based on results or high school scores and stuff like that, even though Division II schools in the States had done that.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I need you to come try out. And I'm like, okay, well, because U of A was a last minute application, my Canadian visa got delayed, and I got here on the 10th of September, or the 11th of September, and the trials were 11th and 12th of September. So I missed the trials.
Yeah.
And I asked him if I could come play for him and like try out. And he's like, no, I'm just going to have to wait until next year. So that really, and then it tailed into winter and I didn't play all 4 months. So that really like crushed my, I didn't want to play. It was kind of like traumatizing for me. Whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, silly thing to be traumatized by, but hey. And then I went home and I played, and then I came back and I tried out. But at that point, because I hadn't played for a year.
Yeah, you missed a whole year. Yeah, it's tough.
I went from a +2 to like a 6 or a 7, I think, at that point.
Brutal.
And then I suck. I suck. And then I just didn't make it. And then I just didn't really play all throughout university just because it's expensive here.
Yeah. And they only get a couple months too.
Yeah, exactly. And I really started playing again when I moved to Regina for work. After
I remember you joined a good club there. It seemed like I'd always see on Twitter you guys always going on. I was watching you guys talk.
Yeah, so it was a really nice community to play golf in. Because it's a small town. Everyone in the golf club kind of knows each other, and it wasn't super expensive for someone in my age group. We had intermediate memberships, which is, I think, again, great. Yeah, there should be more intermediate memberships for people under the age of 30,
especially with how big golf is growing with the younger age group right now.
Absolutely, the number one reason I don't have a membership in Edmonton and haven't had a membership in Edmonton is because it's too expensive. The one in Regina was, everything but like anything I spent on food and beverage was like $1,800. Which is, if you average it, if you have a membership and you play a lot, I played, in my 2 years there, I played about 140 rounds. So, but if you have that membership and if you have the time to spend to it, it works out to
be cheaper than
what you would pay, right?
Yeah.
So I did that, and that's when I really got back into golf, and I went back down to a scratch handicap, which is a 0.
Yeah.
Which means that on a par 72, I should shoot 72. And now I would say in the 3 years since, I'm probably at like last year actually I kept score and I was at a 3.5 or a 4 or something like that. So that's my handicap right now. Yeah.
I'm so excited to golf with you and Chase this summer.
Dude, you know what? We tried to.
I feel like we've tried to line up games of golf like every year for the past like 6 years,
except for this last year.
Yeah, except for last year.
This year. Yeah. But yeah, no, I would love to. I would love to golf. It's fantastic. It's a great sport. It just is. There's so much that can go wrong, which makes it exciting.
Yeah.
And you only have yourself to blame, really. So,
and there's a lot of that. That was my biggest thing. Like when I started golfing, I loved the game. It was fun, but I'm such a snap show that like it was not a good game for me like at that time. But then as I got older, once I could like get to the age where I could go like with my friends who like also sucked, like my buddy Clinton Miller, like he was never a great golfer, like kind of similar to me. Like we both had like, if we could, we're just so inconsistent, right? Like even now, like if I could hit my best shot every time, which is golf in a nutshell, like I have a decent swing, I can do these things, but just every once in a while, one's going into the houses, right? Like I'm putting one through a window.
But that's what makes it great is that there's room for improvement on every single shot that you have.
Yeah.
Going back to your original question, who's my favorite golfer?
Right. Yeah, you didn't even answer that.
I just kind of tailed off there. So I grew. My first exposure to golf was that video game, and so I'd say Tiger was the biggest influence there, obviously.
Yeah. When I ask people who their favorite golfer is, I just assume it's Tiger and just be like, okay, other than Tiger, who's your favorite? I've never asked any person, and I haven't asked this question of a lot of people, but I've never heard any answer but Tiger, right?
So I would say, so Tiger was insanely important for me. Like just like seeing
for golf,
for golf, for just seeing someone so different and someone so explosive in their power and how they're dominant.
Yeah.
But I modeled my swing kind of after two golfers that aren't Tiger Woods. Ernie Els and Vijay Singh.
Oh yeah.
Those two, like, because they're similar in stature to me. They're tall, wide, bigger guys, and their swings are just very like long and lanky and smooth and like not controlled, but like they're not trying to overpower.
Yeah, it uses the attributes of your frame.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And so those were my two favorite golfers when I first started playing. And then I would say in the new wave, I really like Rory and I really like Justin Thomas.
Yeah.
I really, really like Justin Thomas.
Yeah, I like both those guys too. Yeah. I feel like half of my people I like is just who Chase likes because that's who we watch when I'm over at his house watching golf.
Yeah.
But what do you think of DeChambeau and what he did? And maybe just explain to people what happened when he was a good golfer, right? Like was kind of middle of the pack, and then he made a conscious decision to bring his ball speed up and to gain a lot of weight. And, he's been crushing protein shakes, and now he's just this absolute mutant, bombing the ball like way past everybody. It's hilarious.
Yeah, so I think so Bryson DeChambeau was, like you said, a decent golfer. He's on the PGA Tour, so he's in the top fucking 0.5% of the world, right? And he's a winner on the PGA Tour prior to his transformation.
Right, yeah.
So that's important. It's not that he was a shit golfer
For sure.
What he saw was an opportunity where he could set himself apart from the rest of the field, where he could gain a comparative advantage. And that's the exact same thing that Tiger did when he first came on the scene. He was faster. He was the first person to weight train. He was the first person to actually focus on ball speed and velocity and short game as opposed to like everyone else, right? He was the first person to challenge the idea of a par 4 not being long enough.
Right.
So Bryson is doing that same thing, but he's going about it in a different way. He said, what can I do to put myself above everyone else? I can drive the ball farther. I can drive the ball farther and with more accuracy.
Yeah.
Right. And on a more consistent basis. And so he's always been kind of this scientific mind.
Yeah. He paces out all his shots.
He's always used data to back up what he is doing on the field. There's two types of golfers. There's the field golfer, and then there's the logical, like,
which is
data science golfer.
That book I recommended to you. That's exactly what it looks at, is those two things and kind of how both those journeys went throughout the whole history. This book, I'll give it to you. I'll send it to you when I get home. It's amazing.
I would love to read it.
Yeah.
And so me personally, I'm kind of in the middle of those two things. I like to incorporate data into my routine, but like not too much.
Yeah.
I like to go off of feel. But anyway, Bryson is firmly in the data camp. He does not do things based off of feel. You can tell that just by his swing.
Yeah.
So he took all of this data. He made scientific improvements to see what he could do better. He put on a lot of weight. He puts a lot of tech and research into his shafts and the clubs that he uses.
And he got all his clubs to be the same size.
He has the same size length, so he can, in theory, have the same swing but with different results, which is what you want. So it eliminates, an area of error.
Right.
And then as a result, he was bombing it 50 yards past everyone. What's really impressive is that his putting wasn't awful. Like, his putting is actually very,
because he already had short game, right? Like, he just
exactly.
Yeah.
And so he's won as a result of it. So I think he deserves all the credit in the world for that. But I think
he didn't do it himself. He didn't do himself any favors along the way to get people on his side.
Yeah, he got a little cocky. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay to be cocky when you have.
He's such a gomer
with like the dominant streak that Tiger had. But if you can't win every single tournament or be in contention in every single tournament, golf is a very humbling sport.
Yeah.
Like the fact,
like what he said about Augusta.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. What really turned me off of Bryson was when he said, "Oh, Augusta should be a par 67," and then proceeds to fucking shoot a par 3 rounds in a row.
Oh, that was awesome.
Go fuck yourself.
I love that.
I like him.
Yeah, me too. That's the thing.
He's individualistic and he has his own thing.
He's like a lovable gomer. Like, he just says always the wrong thing, right? Like it's like he almost does what Patrick Reed pretends to do, is be oblivious and just, hey, I didn't know, and just does greasy shit all the time.
Patrick Reed is a fucking ass cunt.
For sure.
Sorry. Edit that out, but you know what I mean? Like,
I'm gonna edit it so that you say it twice, because I think it needs to just be emphasized.
He's just a bad person.
Yeah. He's such a prick, eh?
Yeah.
Like, all the time. And he giggles, but that's the thing. He has a glimmer in his eye where he knows
what he's doing.
He's the bad boy. He's the Floyd Mayweather. He's the Colby Covington. He's seen this in other sports of, you can play the heel, right? It's wrestling.
He's a cheat though.
But he cheats. That's the thing. But he knows.
I'm okay with you being a villain, which is why I'm okay with Bryson being Bryson, because I can be like, okay, he's like the evil genius.
Exactly.
He can be the villain and golf needs more drama.
It seems like it genuinely seems like he doesn't even realize it's coming across that way sometimes with Bryson. But with Patrick Reed,
he knows. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How many? It doesn't take a professional to know. So he did this thing at a tournament a couple of weeks ago. I think it was I forget where it was.
Before Pebble Beach.
It was before Pebble Beach, where he his tee shot landed in the rough right next to a cart path, and it had the potential of being plugged. And so in golf, when it's plugged, you're allowed to call a rules official. You mark it. If he deems it plugged, you can lift it, and plugged
just means it's embedded in the ground.
Yes, but only under certain situations. So if it's been if the weather has made it more has made it easier for balls to plug,
right,
they'll put a lift clean place rule in effect for that round.
And was there one for that round?
Yes, there was. But he's still not allowed to
pick it up and do it without clearing it.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
You just cannot do that. Because the rules official has to come and deem, oh yeah, it's actually plugged. You can peg it up.
Yeah.
Like, I know that. Every other freaking amateur in the world.
I knew that when I watched it, because like I said, Chase has got me completely hooked in. I actually had the game on, like I just threw it on. Usually I have it on mute and I don't really watch it, but there was such a hoopla. Or maybe I saw it on Twitter and I turned it on to watch, right? Like, and you could see
it's just shocking.
I knew
to see
that.
A professional athlete have such continuous disregard for the rules that everyone else.
Especially when you have that moniker and that dark cloud above you of being a cheater for years and years to keep doing that shit. Like,
dude, absolutely. And then he goes, and then he's just such a shit person, because then he goes and posts from his wife's fucking burner account.
Yeah. That Rory did the same thing or something. Just tried to fucking.
I was texting a friend about it, and we were just laughing so hard that he was doing that. Like, it's just insane. I don't cheer for him. I hate when he wins. And I hate myself because I think his swing is fucking beautiful.
Yeah, that's what Chase always says. He said he's too good for it. It pisses you off because he's so good. And what Chase was explaining to me, or trying to explain to me, again, I don't think I take in half the shit he says to me, but I try, about these, not walk-ons, he had a name for them, for these tournaments where they have like a couple days earlier, they have a
qualifier.
A qualifier, yeah. And he said that Patrick Reed got on the tour, like he won a bunch of qualifiers. Yeah. And he said, imagine how much he cheated in those qualifiers when nobody's looking, right? And now he got onto the tour, right? And clearly he's good enough to be there. So clearly he was just taking shortcuts knowing he would get there. And it's, golf is about as meritocracy as you can find, right? Like, your skills are going to speak for yourself. If you can't cut it, you can't cut it. Cheating is the one thing. And I feel like that's why cheating, and the two meritocracies you see is stand-up comedy, because if you don't make people laugh, you don't make people laugh. It's one or the other. It's binary. In golf, right? That's two things. And the two things you can't do in golf, you can't cheat. And that's why rules are so sacred in golf, because it's that one, you don't find meritocracies around a lot, right? So when you do, you have to protect them and you have to keep them in place. And the rules is the only thing that holds that meritocracy in place. And in comedy, it's joke thievery.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the two things that you cannot do in either area, and they're so demonized, right? And he just flies in the face of it and treats it like it's not even a big deal.
Exactly.
He walks around like it's just fine, then he cheats all the time.
I think it's just probably a microcosm of who he is as a person in real life, because when we've all had that feeling where if you play golf, I guess, where we hit a shot and it's not in the position where we wanted it to be in the first place. We've all had the thought, we're like, man, I really wish that this was just like a little bit over there, or it was out of this divot, or it was not in this bunker, or yada, 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 right? The self-restraint that it takes to not just like foot wedge it out.
My foot wedge is my best. It's the best club in my bag.
Yeah, but
sure.
the thing is,
I also don't give a fuck.
But the thing is, it's not cheating when we do it on in a regular round, because we're just accepting that we're playing with
half the time. I'm not even keeping score. I'm just having fun, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you're playing for keeps, when you're playing for stakes, when you're
other people's livelihoods are at stake, right?
Exactly.
Like the amount of money other people can make.
It's disrespectful not only to the game, but it's disrespectful to everyone else who's grinding their ass and playing.
Yeah, all those guys on the Corn Ferry that talk about that experience. That's also another thing. This Corn Ferry tour. This is a new thing to me, and the grind it is, and how much like these guys, and that's something eventually on this podcast, I want to have some Corn Ferry guys on to talk about the experience, right? Because like, to get that PGA card, if you can get off that tour and get onto the PGA, your life is so different.
It's a game changer.
It's very similar to the guys that are fighting. Like, MMA is a huge sport to me. These last couple of years, I've gotten so far into it. I'm absolutely balls deep. I watch it more than I watch hockey. And it's very similar. These guys that are fighting, grinding in these organizations, these LFAs and all these things to try and get that shot, and you get that one fight in the UFC, that is your meal ticket. If you can capitalize on that, if you can capitalize on that, your life's going to be completely different. And I love that. If anything can find that area where, with enough hard work and pursuit, and I guess fighting is another meritocracy, right? Like where, again, if you follow the rules, it's going to come out in the wash. Once you get to that elite of the elite, if you don't have it, you're not going to step out of that cage the victor, right?
Exactly.
And I just love that. In anywhere I can find somewhere where, and I think it stems from going way back to the start of the conversation of that feeling, of the injustice in the world, and to know that it's there and how it can really weigh on you and pull you down. The things that build you up is those areas where all that bullshit, there's no politics, there's politics and everything, but in the actual game of golf itself, once you're out on the thing, there's no politics. Once you tee off on one, there's no politics no more. Exactly. Once that door closes on the cage, there's a ton of politics in MMA, and it's all politics, frankly.
But as soon as the ring,
door closes, that is. As soon as you step on stage as a stand-up comic, there's none, right? And that is what you look, and you look for those, and then you find greatness there. So now somebody becomes a great politician. They could have been great. I don't know. Or they could have just been, enough to weasel their way in, right? Patrick Reed could have cheated his way in. That's why it takes away that specialness of it, right? Where it's sacred for a reason.
Well, it's also just very disheartening for people who are trying to make it and like would have made it if he hadn't done this or if he hadn't done that. And the issue is he's just the one that's gotten caught. How many more of these people are there?
Yeah. Exactly.
It just disheartens you if you're constantly not making cuts on the Corn Ferry, or constantly missing cuts on the PGA because 18 people are cheating and placing the ball a little bit here or there. That's true across society, though. I feel like you find people who are disillusioned or disenfranchised with our current view of society, or are discouraged from trying new things or continuing to forge ahead, or have had their fires extinguished, or any number of metaphors that I could use here. Typically, when you ask them why that's happened, they will be able to point to certain situations where people in similar positions took unfair advantage of situations and progressed as a result. And that happened on a consistent enough basis for them to lose faith in the system.
Yeah. So now I have a question for you. This whole Patrick Reed thing it was very public and stuff. And do you think there's an argument to be made that he is good, as frustrating as it is? Do you think he hit those kind of antics? Do you think that's good for the game in the whole, for the attention it brings, even if it's not the right type of attention?
I think it's good for the game that more people are talking about it, but the means don't justify the end.
Yeah. That's kind of what I figured. It's just kind of maybe a silver lining on it.
I think there's enough drama. If you really want to focus on it, I mean, just mic up Jordan Spieth.
Yeah, no shit, hey?
Follow him around for a round. He's just like a regular dude who's just gets mad at him.
Same with Dustin Johnson.
Same with JT. I mean, he let a homophobic slur slip a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, yes, that's a bad thing to say. And immediately, as soon as he realized, he was like, no, that was awful. I'm sorry. I fucked up. That's not who I am. And I apologize for it. I'm going to do
to judge anybody by one moment is if they show
my point is, like, you can add drama to golf and make it more watchable for people who think that it's boring, by just miking up players if you want to, or like allowing their individuality to express.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. That argument I said about hockey and them going into that, I think golf's doing the same thing, because you see the Wolves of the world and these young guys coming up. And maybe that's the next question I was going to ask you. Who are you excited about? Like, who's up and coming? Who do you think is going to be the next wave?
I love Colin Morikawa.
Yeah, he's sick,
eh? My dog. He is fucking great.
He's been in the PGA for a bit now, because I've watched lots of tournaments with him.
4 years now, or 2 years now. He had the second longest, I think, streak of made cuts after Tiger.
Oh wow!
He's won a major. He is just a smart.
And
dude.
How old is he?
He's like
20s,
23, 24.
Oh shit, he's young.
He's fantastic. Him. I really like Wolf just because he's just so unorthodox.
Yeah, his swing looks so wild, hey?
He's just like a gunslinger. He just walks up and he's like, fuck this. I'm just going to mash this 350 and then drain a 16-foot putt for people, I love him. I really like Xander Schauffele. I really like his
Is he young?
He's young as well. Like, all these guys are like 20, 26, 25 and under.
Right.
Colin Morikawa, Wolf, Xander Schauffele, and then...
Is that a new thing? Because I think something that I've seen just as an outside observer is that golf is getting very popular with young people, and it just has in this renaissance right now. Whereas I think, which has also happened at a certain point when Tiger first came on the scene, it got really up with young people, but then that kind of fell off, and now we're seeing it again. Is that unusual for the PGA to be dominated by this many young people?
It's definitely the way that the new
it's kind of the way things are going.
New age is going, because now you have a lot more talent and a lot more resources to harness that talent.
Right.
So you have more people with the same talent level rising to the top. Whereas before you had, because resources weren't allocated or people didn't view it as a viable option, you had one guy or three guys that were, young that were really good, but a lot of young guys that didn't pursue it as an actual career. Now that people have seen that you can actually make a living off of this, you have a lot more younger talent coming through. I think the other thing that's really happened is collegiate golf programs have really, really come a long way in the last 20 years, where it's become a major collegiate sport. It used to just be football and that's it. Football was the only collegiate sport in the States. Now, football and basketball.
Yeah, that was the two.
Yes, sorry. I knew I was missing something.
Yeah, no worries.
Football and basketball. But now you see like national and international coverage of collegiate hockey, collegiate golf, collegiate like athletics. So you're seeing a lot more talent come to the top and continue playing that sport for a longer period of time than you typically did.
And there's more people on the lookout for those talents too, because like wasn't Dustin Johnson not even like playing on a college team and like he was just out like bombing and people were like, have you tried out? And they're like, no, I never tried. Like, you should go try out. And you're like, all right, I'll try it out. Exactly. He's just such a bro, right? Like, oh, I love that stuff. It's such a good story.
and there's all sorts of like international recruiting that's happening with collegiate golf now as well.
Which is really I feel like every time I turn on the PGA, I see more and more. It seems like Korea is like the golf mecca. Like there's so many good golfers for such a small place. Like that is wild.
So being in Pakistan and watching golf in Pakistan, we get a lot of the Asian tour there, and some of the players on the Asian tour are fucking phenomenal.
Yeah,
like they're incredible, and it's just a assembly line of like top tier golfers coming out of Korea, Japan, China.
Well, same things happen in MMA, right? Like the UFC is cultivating all these Asian talents because there's a huge market. They're putting these performance institutes in mainland China, in all these areas over there to start, bringing that up because there's so many people out there that just don't have all those means like we have here. But if they did, the talent's there.
The other thing too is like they're not strangers to
hard work.
Hard work. No, they're not strangers to fighting arts.
Yeah.
Right.
Very fair. Yeah. Right? Like they have a long history.
They have a very long history in fighting arts, and isn't like they're.
And I think that actually held them back. I think you're so right here. I think you're more right than you know, but I think that held them back for a long time because I think there was such a long history, but it was very structured and very
cultural,
and they didn't, the mixing of the other sport, like mixing judo, karate, boxing, kickboxing, all those things together was a no-no, right? Yeah. So that kind of held them back. So then in the 90s, kind of MMA growing and really finding the best ways for all this stuff to come together, then you start to see the first Asian fight, like kind of early 2000s now, they started to let go of that, loosen that up. And now they still have that long history and that all that stuff that's now buoying them up. And that's why we're seeing such an uprising. You're very right. But I think for a long time they held them back and now we're seeing the dam break. And now they're open up to exploring these new ways of what martial arts can be, right? The definition of martial arts kind of got snapped in half, right? And for a long time people were closing their eyes to that. But then, like you say, it's a marathon. It's the results show for themselves the evolution of what it's become, right? When you look at what MMA, if you look at a MMA or UFC 1 with Royce Gracie and all them to what it is now, it's even looking 6 years ago, right? Like 2015, it doesn't even look like the same sport because it's so fresh in itself, right? Like they're the best comparison people always use is like if you're comparing this to football, MMA is still in its leather helmet days, right? Like football today has been around so long that there isn't going to be something that changes the game, right? Like it's hard. Or there can be, but it's much harder. Whereas anyway, it's still so fresh. People are still figuring out. We don't know what the best things are yet. Where it's changing all the time. There's this new technique, this low leg kick on the calf that has changed the whole game, right? McGregor just lost to it from Dustin Poirier, but it's been happening over the last 3-4 years. It's just changed the entire.
It's really
game.
Still in its infancy phase.
Yeah, it is, and it changes all the time.
In 50 years, you'll look back at it and be like, "Oh, you'll gloss over this period of UFC development, like the same way we gloss over, pre-Super Bowl era in the football world. We just don't talk about that era because it was just so old."
Well, how about this? My thought on this is what I see right now, and again, I could be completely wrong, so maybe stop me if I'm off on this. But I see from an outsider's perspective with golf. There was so much tradition around it that protected it, but it seems like it's breaking a little.
No, definitely.
Like the hoodies in the game now.
Definitely.
And I feel like that is the biggest thing that's pulling. I mean, Tiger is obviously the biggest thing, but take that out of the equation. That, like loosening up of the rules, making it bring a little bit more fun into it is what's bringing all these young kids because it's such a fun game. But the hoity-toityness, that's what I hated about it as a kid. I would get so mad because I didn't want to follow these rules. But then going out with my friends and just enjoying the game for what it is and just, it doesn't matter if we do good or bad. I'm just here to enjoy it. It's like, oh, this is a great sport. Like, why was I not doing this earlier?
It's about making it accessible for all levels of life, right? And so there's all this decorum that goes with golf.
Yeah.
You can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do this. You can't wear,
flashy colors.
You can't wear flashy colors. You can't wear shorts on the PGA Tour, which is just a fucking archaic rule.
Ridiculous.
I just don't understand why you can allow people to wear shorts.
Don't they understand big boys chafety? Come on.
It's dumb, man. Like the frustrating part about it is that they allow people to wear shorts during practice rounds and then don't allow people to wear shorts during actual rounds. Like, I guarantee you the people at home watching are not like, Rory's not wearing pants.
Like, there might be, but they've only got maybe 2 or 3 years of golf watching left in their career, right? Like,
why does that matter?
Yeah. And why are we tailoring to those couple people that are 85 years old and they're still stuck in the old ways, right? If you want to stay on the cutting edge, you got to stay up front. And that's what I see with all this stuff. That's what I see with education. And I feel like on so many fronts, and obviously I'm biased because I love podcasts so much, but I see podcasts being a bastion of that change in so many areas, right? It did it with hockey with Spit and Chicklets. It did it with comedy with Rogan. It did it with all these areas of just, and what it is, it's not podcasts. It's just unfiltered, one person's view on it from an actual professional of that, right? Like, you get a golfer that's going to come on and actually talk about that, which there is podcasts of, and tell you the inside, what it's actually like in there. That's going to draw people in. Now they actually know what it's like, right? Like, hearing those stories about these Corn Ferry guys and what a struggle that is. I'm so interested in the Corn Ferry Tour now from that, but if I never would have heard about it.
Yeah, so that's a really good point that you bring up, and it's because I say it's a good point because it's, again, applied throughout other spheres. We always want to know, as a species, we just want to know more. And so when something is shrouded in mystique or a shroud of
mystery,
mystique, mystery.
Yeah.
What's the word I'm looking for? Culture or like history, or this is the way things have been, and you don't really know the inner workings of stuff like that. When someone breaks through that barrier and almost like gives that knowledge or information to a starved audience, they latch onto it. And this is the reason, like you said, Rogan and Spit and Chicklets have been really popular. Pat McAfee, I don't know if you watch him
Colts
or not.
kicker.
Yeah, Colts kicker. Yeah. He does a YouTube radio show, Pat McAfee show, and he does it daily. And like, you learn the inner workings of like NFL locker rooms.
Yeah.
So you can, for fans of football, watching a football game, you can relate. There's other narratives that are now going on that you know about.
Ariel Helwani with MMA, he was a journalist, and he did on Monday, he would have these shows. They'd be like 3 or 4 hours long, where just from the weekend, all the action, he had all the fighters on, and they would talk about their experience, and he would give you these long form looks into what these fighters are going through. And then, but that started, that was one of the first ones. He was doing this years and years ago. So that was what made the sport grow so much, and why I fell in love with it. Because now, usually there's stories within teams, right? In team sports, but when you look at a fight card on a Saturday, say there's 12 fights, right? So 24 guys. There's 24 amazing stories of struggle and personal grind of what they went through in their families and what they gave up. Every time, you just need people to tell those stories.
For
right?
fans of sports, I feel like we're fans of the actual sport that's being played, but at the end of it all, we're just using that as to feel part
proxy for connection.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same reason people like shit like The Bachelor and The Kardashians.
100%.
And the people get into politics because it's the narratives that really entertain us.
Yeah. Everything is Star Wars.
Everything is Star Wars. Yeah. I am very excited to know where fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi came from. Like, I want his story.
Yeah.
I want to put it into my veins.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I think this leads to a different conversation, but shaming people for watching football or being a jock or being invested in sports or The Bachelor or, okay, The Bachelor is a different topic. I won't talk about that. There's other issues with it.
Yeah.
But like, shaming people for doing stuff like that is bullshit, because at the end of the day, if you really dive down to it, all they're looking for is
the same thing as you are.
Narrative. They're just exactly same thing as you are, but just looking for it in a different form, because that's 100%. What appeals to them.
Oh, well, I think if I try and say anything else, I think I'll probably ruin it, because that was a perfect way to end it, T. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad I have such a special guest for episode 50. I was worried that I wouldn't have a good one, and I love that conversation. That was so much fun. That was a highlight of my last couple months, to be honest with you. She's been tough, and that was so much fun. So nice to connect with you. I can't wait to get on the golf course, and I think after this, we're going to be doing this more often because I think we could do this. We didn't talk any LHSA stuff. We didn't talk. There's so many areas we didn't even get to touch on today. So I'm sure you'll be back here soon. I mean, I usually like to let a couple months go between, but I think we might need to make an exception for this. Man, get you back on here.
I live 3 kilometers away, so
hey, perfect.
I could make that happen.
You heard him, folks. He's coming back on. All right. Well, thanks again, bro. I love that, and I love you.
Pleasure to be here. Love you too, man.
All right. Thanks, man. All right, everybody, that's 50 episodes in the books. Can't believe how quickly that came and went. It seemed like just yesterday the start of the podcast. And like I said in the intro, sometimes it gets frustrating. Things aren't moving as fast as you want them to, but also you just need to take that moment. I was just thinking this morning, before I started this podcast, there were so many weekends where, you get through a week of work and it's just like, I need to lay in bed and recover for these 2 days just to make sure I got enough in the tank to just handle another week at work. And to now know that I have accomplished since I started this podcast, it was the most testing time at work that I could have gone through, more curveballs thrown than I ever would have thought I would have to deal with. And then on top of that, to be able to work on this podcast and bring it to where it is now, I need to be very, very happy with where it is. And I am very happy. I just, like I say, I have very high standards for myself and I know what this podcast can be and I'm excited to get it there. It's just going to take some time and I need to make sure I'm balancing everything else out. And when the time comes to, jump full steam head first into this as my number one thing, the time is going to come, but I just need to be patient for that and not force it, because I think that's number one thing that goes wrong with businesses or startups or entrepreneurships is just, rushing and not doing things the right way. So following the procedures, trusting the process, and I can't wait to bring it where it needs to be. Next week's episodes, first, I might even release it early. I'm so excited about it, but got my first big MMA personality on and really excited about that. Some really big things to come. And hopefully you guys enjoy and can give it a share and all that fun jazz. You guys know the drill. All right. See you guys.